Number 10. The Dark Knight. So while many have horrifyingly dismissed Mark as just another Batman ripoff, we're here to calmly assure you it's just not so. While there are a good number of similarities that can be pointed to in regards to the heroes, never fear, Top 10 Nerd is here to point out the prominent differences. Batman fights for justice, so he never kills, whereas Moon Knight fights for Khonshu and was a former mercenary, who has no problem whatsoever with killing his enemies. Beyond that, their motivations are completely different. Batman is driven by his guilt and the death of his parents, Mark is driven by his almost contractual obligation to Khonshu. His path as a hero is less direct and takes him all over the place. Then there is the easy one. See if you can spot it. Batman wears all black, Moon Knight wears all white. Batman hides in the shadows, Moon Knight wants his enemies to see him coming. That's why he wears white. I'm not making that up either, that's straight out of the comics. Number 9. Not so ancient weapons. While his weapons come from the ancient Egyptian tomb where he was laid to rest beneath Khonshu's idol and received his powers, they are not as old as they seem. Well, they sort of are, but they also aren't. His weapons are actually surprisingly modern. While this may not seem scary to you, this story involves some timey-wimey time travel stuff, and time travel can be pretty terrifying as it can mess up you and your life's trajectory. Hardcore. To me, the idea of that is pretty scary. In a West Coast Avengers storyline, the team gets flung thousands of years into the past and ends up in ancient Egypt. Hawkeye fashions weapons to help the priests of Khonshu defend themselves, and it is these weapons that end up in the tomb where Moon Knight later receives his powers. So yeah, he wouldn't really be himself if not for time travel and Hawkeye and the West Coast Avengers. And oddly enough, Moon Knight also becomes a West Coast Avenger. Weirdly cyclical storytelling, making me wonder if the Marvel Universe is actually stuck in some kind of time loop. Number 8. Bushman was resurrected. So if you've watched my part 1, you know that Mark skinned Bushman's face off and left him for dead after breaking both of his own knees in their epic fight. But did you know that Bushman was later resurrected? Yep, that's right. You thought resurrection was just saved for Khonshu? Cause it's not. Moon Knight goes up against Bushman again after he is resurrected by the Hood. The Hood resurrected Bushman when tasked by Norman Osborn with getting rid of Moon Knight. During the events of the Vengeance of the Moon Knight series, a tussle eventually ensues between Moon Knight and his #1 enemy Bushman. Mark gets the upper hand and impales Bushman with a machine gun. He actually goes to cut off his face again, but decides against it in the end. Whew. Number 7. Member of the Avengers. That's right, Moon Knight was even Steve Rogers approved to join up, even after he terrified Beast after having an indifferent, some would say even jovial reaction to being shot in the leg. Despite the fact that he often claims that he is a loner, Mark has actually been a part of multiple Avengers teams, including the West Coast Avengers. Many other heroes have feared working alongside him simply because they worry about his mental instability and how it will affect him while on missions. Granted, so far he has managed to behave pretty well while on teams and rein in his other personalities when he needs to. Number 6. He fights ghosts. You heard me right. The cool thing about Moon Knight is because he has so many different personas, he is actually a very versatile hero and character. He can fit in almost anywhere, whether it be in his own dark violence stories, in the criminal underbelly of New York, serving vigilante justice, alongside the fellow Avengers, or in the mystic realm. He has even worked alongside Doctor Strange. We could see him pop up in the MCU just about anywhere, and he could fit in. He has proven before that he truly belonged in the mysterious mystic world when he was in his detective persona, Mr. Knight. During Moon Knight Volume 5, we see him take to the streets, solving mysteries and punching ghosts. Literally. Spooky.
Number 5. Acupressure. So She-Hulk has a host of skills, cause she isn't as powerful as the Hulk all the time, depends what canon we're working on. It's a bit of a trade-off, she has more control than Bruce, usually, but because of this she has learned other skills, such as hand-to-hand combat. She was trained by Captain America and also Gamora. She also has an extensive knowledge of acupressure points, which in comic book terms means you have about 20 extra points to approaching God tier. She would use this on Abomination, a character who was named as such because of the fact that Stan Lee noticed that no other character had that name. Deep. But She-Hulk is called She-Hulk, so still, acupressure is yet another weapon in She-Hulk's mighty arsenal. Number 4. Tearing Vision in half. So Amanda mentioned this in part 1, but let's get specific about how this happened. I mean, yes, Vision is a synthezoid, but it's still dramatic. Nobody likes getting torn in half. This occurred during the sensational She-Hulk run. So She-Hulk has been on many teams, and that includes the Avengers. After returning to that team, she would spend time with her fellow Avengers, such as Jack of Hearts, and she would just kind of passively absorb radiation off of him. This would over time lead to her being unable to control her changes or herself, and this would lead to her tearing Vision in half. Hulk tear, Hulk rip. It turned out that this wasn't Jack of Hearts' fault at all, but the Scarlet Witch and her abilities back when she was still a mutant. I will accept no substitutes. That retcon made my heart sad. But I digress. Wanda and Vision have a complicated relationship that is actually very far from romantic when you break it down. I don't know. I've never subtly influenced reality to have my husband torn in half. That's all I'm saying. Number 3, Wyatt Wingfoot. We're actually going to talk about the abuses She-Hulk suffered here, but I wanted to name the number after Wyatt because not only does he support her, but he doesn't get talked about enough. Except when he's trying to usurp the position of best friend to Johnny Storm from Spider-Man. Stop it. So She-Hulk met Wyatt while she was on the Fantastic Four, during the period where the Thing had left, and he was there for her when some scuzzy things happened, such as a paparazzo taking her picture while she was sunbathing topless, and the only reason it didn't really fully get out there was because an editor color corrected her skin. She was later forced to strip naked by corrupt S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, who then medically examined her to see if she could be left unsupervised or have to be followed around like her cousin, but this was really so that they could get spank material. Jen hadn't really encountered things like this before, so it freaked her out and obviously made her feel unsafe. Wyatt was there to help her through that, because Wyatt's a dependable, sort of genuine nice guy, not a fake nice guy, except when he's trying to push out Peter. Let Peter have one friend who's not evil. He's earned it. These incidents are often referenced when we come to the digital era, and Jen calling out Bruce, her cousin the Hulk, for being jealous of her. Now Bruce and Jen have different experiences, but when you force me to compare the litany of horrors committed against her and him, she doesn't come out looking great in my opinion for calling him out for being jealous. Yeah, he might not know the whole story, fair enough, and be having a bit of the grass is greener, but Hulk got shot into space because he was such a problem. When he got there, he got to see the new people who eventually embraced him die. He was cut into pieces and kept in jars to see how far his rejuvenation could extend. For years he lived on the street, hunted by a special task force. He now can never die. He's been feared by friends and foes alike. The amount of times he's been hated in canon far outweighs the times he's been loved. Oh yeah, and if he gets too smart, he risks going full Maestro. In Elseworld stories, it's been established he'll be the last creature alive on the earth. So yeah, I can see from his perspective being jealous of pretty much anybody else, even when bad things happen to them. I mean, would Jen want to be Bruce? And if so, why? Like that reporter who wants to be the Hulk and the Immortal Hulk? Like, girl, have you read all the Hulk? You should want to be someone with a good life. Like, I don't know, someone not in the Marvel Universe? Maybe Doom? Being Doom could be okay. Share your thoughts. I'm curious. Do you feel Jen was right to call out Bruce for being jealous of her? If so, why? I want to know. Because there's real world issue context and then there's Marvel canon context, and they can cause different responses. Number 2, fighting the Comics Code Authority. Now She-Hulk is known in many circles for being hot, sexy, big and green. She can bench press you and look hot doing it. I want to be bench pressed by the She-Hulk. But nowadays, this status has a bit of a complex relationship with fans. However, back in the day, it was seen by some as more of a sign of empowerment, because She-Hulk was fighting the Comics Code Authority. Established in 1954 as a result of Senate hearings following mass hysteria surrounding comic books and the link to juvenile delinquency, an unfounded link, just a hypothetical link, this was further exacerbated by Frederick Wertham's Seduction of the Innocent, which on top of policing violence in comics was quite critical of sexuality. The code was created so the industry could self-regulate or face government intervention. They chose self-regulation. This would create a panic around the presentation of women. For years there was a no cleavage or not too much skin unless they're evil, all kinds of subtle rules about how women could and couldn't be presented. One of the ways comic creators would fight back would be to reveal more of the woman. So her ripped costumes were actually a big FU to the comics code. Her naked cover, aside from being based off an extremely popular photo shoot of the time, was again an FU. You can't police female sexuality. Now for some this loses its punchline because it was largely pushed forward by men, but for others this was a big moment. She-Hulk has had a long history of being used to further ideas outside of her character itself, and that brings us to number 1. Number 1, changing her origin controversy. Disney Plus has been threatening a change in origin for the She-Hulk. Now whether they do or don't is less interesting than the why behind it. The MCU has changed many origins to suit itself in its canon, so if it did, it wouldn't be unprecedented. However, it is the why some people feel it should be changed that is fascinating. The She-Hulk originally gets her powers after being shot by some criminals that were involved in a case she was prosecuting. Jen is a criminal lawyer. To save her life, her cousin Bruce Banner gives her a blood transfusion. The gamma in his blood causes her to adopt Hulk-like characteristics, and she transforms and decides to embrace this and becomes the She-Hulk. Some feel that the fact that she gets her powers from a man is sexist and makes her less of a character, and so she doesn't stand on her own 2 feet, or at least does so less than other characters. While others feel She-Hulk is far more than her origin, and it doesn't lessen her anyways, as she made the choice to be a hero. She could have done nothing, become a villain or hidden, but as established she was a lawyer and she wanted justice, so she was already doing things to make the world a better place. So her becoming a hero after an incident like this made sense. Others feel everybody is just far too focused on origin stories, just throw us in head first. course. Open the show with her tearing Vision in half. Do you think She-Hulk's origin takes away her agency? Would it be better if she had gotten a blood transfusion from a woman, or just not at all? She was researching Hulk blood. Or would the same argument apply, that she's less of a hero because she's getting her powers from someone else? Or is she a legacy character? I mean, if we can have like Six Flashes and Dick, Jason, Tim, Steph, Damian, Kira if you stretch, Robins, why not She-Hulk? And the other Hulks now exist. Just side note, also tons of characters have weak origins and turned out fine. Even the Hulk's is just okay. It's iconic, but I survived a radioactive explosion. It's not exactly my parents are dead.
Starting us off in at number 10, Small Ambitions. Did you know that Venom was never initially supposed to be an alien symbiote from Clintar? That was never in the cards for the black symbiotic suit that first appeared when Spider-Man donned it after the Secret Wars event in 1984's The Amazing Spider-Man issue 252. How did that all unravel, you might be wondering? Well, 2 years prior, back in 1982, a Marvel reader from Illinois named Randy Schruler wrote in to Jim Shooter, who was the editor-in-chief at the time, with an idea of an all-new black costume for Spider-Man. Shooter was intrigued, so Marvel bought the idea from Schuler for $220, kind of a steal. Then, Shooter came up with the idea to switch to the black and white costume, partially influenced by the costume design that Spider-Woman had at the time, which was quite popular. After his suit was destroyed during Secret Wars, Parker was directed to a place on Battleworld by Thor and Hulk that contained a machine that would instantly fabricate any type of clothing. Parker checked it out, but chose the wrong alien machine, which covered him with a new black and white costume that can mimic street clothes. Turns out it's just an alien costume that's trying to use him as a host. Fun. It wasn't until the costume received backlash from fans that it was withdrawn and taken off of Spider-Man, and then repurposed as a new villain, bonding with Eddie Brock to become Venom. Moving on to number 9, he's ditched a host. Venom knows what he likes. And if you're not it, he's not opposed to tossing you to the curb, quite literally in this case. In Marvel Knight's Spider-Man issue 7, we were introduced to a fellow named Angelo Fortunato, who Venom would bond with when Eddie Brock auctioned the symbiote off. Brock sold it to Don Fortunato, who wanted his son to become a man. So naturally, the most rational way of doing that is by buying a deadly alien symbiote who has a flair for violence and an appetite for brains. More on that later. Good one, Don. Angelo and Venom bonded for a while until Venom got bored of him and ditched him in possibly one of the worst ways ever. He bailed on a battle with Spider-Man when it became obvious that he was losing. And then, while jumping over a bunch of rooftops, Venom detached himself from Angelo, letting Angelo fall to his death below, all because Venom thought that he was too much of a coward. I mean, he wasn't wrong, was he? But you don't have to murder a guy, do you, Venom? You can just be like, hey, let's just part ways. This isn't working for me. Moving on to number 8, 2 hosts at once. Did you know that Venom can bond with 2 hosts at once? It's not perfect, let's just say that, or pretty, but it's a thing he can do. For starters, it's as chaotic as it sounds, and really it weakens the crap out of not only Venom, since he's split between the two, but also the hosts he's trying to bond with. This was the case during a battle between Peter Parker and Eddie Brock, during their initial conflict after Venom had bonded with Brock, both physically and emotionally, and set out to kill Spider-Man. Peter sees that he's outmatched at the time and tries to trick the symbiote by begging it to come back to him. That turned into Venom trying to be bonded to both men at once, and also a nice little shot of both ripped men struggling in their undies. Men in comic books can be objectified too, friends. Eventually, Peter is strong enough to win the conflict, with Venom and Brock still both despising the web slinger. Up next, number 7, his first murder was in a church. In his very early days bonded with Eddie Brock, Venom starts off with a splash by killing a cop inside of a church. So, this went down in Amazing Spider-Man issue 300, which is Venom's first on-panel murder. Aw, baby's first murder. His plan initially was to lure Spider-Man to a church called Our Lady of Saints, but that backfired when Spidey used the sound of the church bell there to defeat him. Venom doesn't really do too well with loud, intense sounds. Venom wanted to have a little bit of poetic justice and lure Spidey back there again and trap him in that very same bell. But that also did not pan out for the Clintar, because when he was using the church as an impromptu HQ, a cop stumbled in and came upon Venom. The cop was investigating a criminal who had been stealing from church donation boxes, so instead of risking being exposed, Venom just killed him. In at number 6, Carnage is his kid. Venom would give birth to the Carnage symbiote in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 361. Context time! Clintars are not a very parental race of aliens. They generally give birth like they're laying eggs, but as soon as that offspring pops out of their body, they're gonzo. They don't raise it. And a big reason why is because offspring are always more innately powerful and stronger than their parents. Often the symbiote offspring is discarded and becomes a non-issue, which is what Venom deemed this particular situation to be. But while he was breaking Eddie Brock out of prison, he gave birth to Carnage, and Carnage then bonded with the psychotic serial killer that Brock had as a cellmate, Cletus Cassidy. It all went downhill from there, people.
Number 5, a familiar foe. It should also be noted that because Gore the God Butcher has been around for so long, he isn't just some random villain that Thor comes across. Despite him not making his first comic book appearance until 2012, he and Thor go way back when it comes to their history with one another. In fact, when Thor first comes across the dead gods in issue number 1 of Thor God of Thunder, he doesn't ponder on who is behind it. He actually recognizes Gore's handiwork and suspects him first and foremost. So despite the fact that he didn't exist in comics until 2012, when it comes to his backstory, the God of Thunder and Gore still have had a history. In fact, historically, the first version of Thor that Gore was familiar with was one from way back around 800 AD, a much younger Thor than the present day version that we're familiar with in the main continuity currently. Hence why we follow this version of Thor along with a present and a future version of the character, with their stories interwoven between each other in the Thor God of Thunder series, because, you know, we gotta explain the story of Gore. Despite the year of release being 2012 onward, Gore was also being retconned into Thor's history in this narrative. So it is possible in the film Love and Thunder, Thor will also be familiar with Gore, and the two may already have had a history in the MCU that simply hasn't been touched on yet. Number 4, the Butcher in God Butcher. While there are times that you might feel sympathetic towards Gore, especially considering his tragic origins, and at times his desire to kind of bring people together by killing gods and dismantling beliefs that may otherwise separate them, he is still very much a dark and murderous figure. He doesn't just kill gods, he straight up does butcher them, hence his title. He earned that title. For Gore, he doesn't just want the gods gone, he wants them to feel pain similar to what he himself suffered, and he genuinely seems to enjoy tormenting and toying with gods because of this. You won't just see him make quick work of many gods he comes across, and if he does happen to make quick work of an enemy, it's still likely going to be brutal and bloody, which is what Gore is pretty much known for in the comics. Number 3, cruelty. The other crazy thing about Gore is just how cruel he can be. You would think after all he's lived through, he might be inclined to, you know, show like a modicum of mercy to those he has captured and not yet killed. After all, that's likely what a younger Gore would have hoped for, mercy and kindness from his own gods. And yet Gore was made hard instead by his experience, turning him somewhat into a hypocrite. Despite the fact that he cursed the injustice and cruelty of his gods, this is what he gives back to all those he comes across that oppose him, blinded by his pain and his rage. When Gore captures Volstagg and makes him work for hundreds of years in his mines without feeding him anything, Gore whips the god after he stole a loaf of bread. Volstagg reveals that he was starving, admitting that after hundreds of years, even a god needs to eat some amount of food and must give in to hunger. But Gore only sees this as theft and greed. That is how blinded by rage he has become at this point, and that is how heartless Gore is. He has no sympathy for any god, and like, no matter the circumstance. He's like, are you a god? I don't care. I'm gonna treat you terribly. That's it. And then you're gonna die brutally. Number 2, Gore the God. Speaking of the cruelty that Gore showed Volstagg, his mistreatment of the Asgardian only got worse once Volstagg pointed out that even if Gore managed to wipe out all of the gods, as impossible as that would be, he would never truly finish his mission. Why? Because Gore himself had become an immortal god. He raised worlds, killed and did as he pleased, made others serve him, and in a way, kind of made others worship him. He was indestructible, undefeatable, and inevitable, all adjectives that you associate with godlike beings. According to Volstagg, Gore had become the very thing that he claimed he hated. Needless to say, this was not a reflection that Gore chose to subscribe to, and he was not very pleased that Volstagg had implied this about him. Still, I think Volstagg definitely was making sense with this observation, which is probably why it made Gore so angry, because deep down, he knew that it was at least partially true. Number 1, Agar. Agar was the last member of Gore's family to die before he found the Necro Sword and became a killer of gods. After the death of his mother when he was only a child, the death of his pregnant wife later in life, and all of their other children, his son Agar was the only one left. When Agar died of starvation, that was the final straw for Gore, who lost all faith in the gods completely. As a result of his guilt, his pain, and his inability to accept the loss of Agar, Gore created an alternate version of his son, instinctively using the All Black to do so. This construct, it turns out, also represented the hatred that Gore felt towards what he had become. Yeah, he pretty much knew he'd become a god, he was just in denial. Ultimately, this construct of Agar therefore teamed up with Thor to help him in defeating his father, Gore, in the end revealing that he was truly no more than the symbiotic weapon that Gore had carried with him for years, as Agar faded away.
Starting us off in at number 10, Deadpool 2. Believe it or not, but Omega Red was actually in Deadpool 2. He was planned to play more of a prominent role, but instead only appeared in a few frames in the prison Wade gets sent to. A behind the scenes feature was included where they showcased the villain playing chess with the cameraman between takes, and claiming that he had skipped the makeup department that day. Honestly, same. Without these lights, it's a whole other story right here. While the Deadpool incarnation has more skin pigment than his comic counterpart, the incarnation still seems pretty faithful. The only issue I really have with this is that the Omega symbol isn't centered on his forehead and it's drawn on. From the photos I saw at least. Being a graphic designer, it genuinely hurts me seeing this thing off to the side, but like not off to the side enough, you know? Like, have you ever heard of the rule of thirds? Despite my frustration, we could potentially see Omega Red be a potential main antagonist come any future Deadpool movies, and considering how well the other ones did, I'm pretty sure we're gonna be getting a Deadpool 3. Hopefully he'll make fun of Spider-Man 3 in that one and there'll be like a black suited Deadpool and he'll be like, ah. And at 9, Carbonadium. Carbonadium is the metal that forms Omega Red's arm tentacles. The metal was made as an attempt at recreating the adamantium that coats Wolverine's skeleton and forms his claws. Omega Red also wears carbonadium armor that helps protect against Wolverine's claws and even rockets. The Russian version of adamantium is also very radioactive and harmful to humans, causing Omega Red to have to drain the life force of others, which he does using his tentacles to be able to stay alive. This kind of metal has been possessed by Mark Spector, Peter Parker, Silas Burr, Wade Wilson, and Otto Octavius while he was Peter Parker in the Superior Spider-Man comic arc. The only way to get this metal is by using the carbonadium synthesizer, which has been stolen by Wolverine and thought to have been thrown in a river, but it was instead hidden in the body of a double agent who had died escaping from Omega Red with Wolverine, Sabretooth, and Maverick. Kinda weird, but I guess since they had stolen it, he died keeping it away from Omega Red, so he still was serving his purpose, I guess. And at 8, Ultimate. As with any Marvel character, there are plenty of other versions of that character from different universes and times, and if we were lucky, we get to see quite a few of them. The Ultimate Universe was created to form different versions of iconic Marvel characters, with Ultimate Spider-Man starting off the universe and getting highly praised. Obviously, this caused more and more characters to be adapted into this new universe, with new stories giving writers creative freedom, where they can do almost anything. There are some characters that had big changes made in this universe, so Omega Red was one of them. His Ultimate version is actually a Spider-Man villain, and he has faced off with both versions of the webhead in that series, and changes made to his origin caused his carbonadium tentacles to become organic, rather than artificial attachments that were grafted onto his body, which is slightly less horrifying, but also terribly more horrifying if you think about the implications of that. Like, how did you figure that out? And at 7, Immortal. Omega Red has been quote unquote killed on multiple occasions over his time, but always comes back like William Afton on steroids. This character was thought to be dead so many times, he had started to become Marvel's version of the character who would always return no matter what everyone thought. However, after tracking Wolverine for days and constantly having him escape, Omega Red happens upon him one more time. Wolverine refuses to fight, knowing it's only a part of a bigger plan. But Omega Red, being a villain, threatens to go after Daken if they didn't fight, which as he predicted gets Wolverine ready. However, he was only equipped with a broken sword. Upon seeing that Wolverine was wounded and only holding a broken sword, Omega Red laughed and gave him a free shot. But Logan had a trick up his sleeve. That broken sword was actually none other than the Muramasa blade, a mystic blade forged with a piece of Wolverine's soul, which helped it be able to kill anything. As his free shot, Logan threw the blade into Omega Red's heart, weakening him and eventually killing him. Fans only believed he was dead when, and at number 6, Hell. Because of his past actions and getting killed by Wolverine, Omega Red was sent to Hell, obviously, only getting to fight again when the criminal organization known as the Red Right Hand had sent Wolverine's soul to Hell. As a response, Satan sent Omega Red to fight against his old nemesis side by side with several villains that Wolverine had put in the ground over the years. When he managed to get to Wolverine, he said he would make him suffer for eternity before Wolverine stabbed him in the gut. I mean, that really shouldn't do anything though. Like, you're already in hell, it's not like it can get any worse. And so what, your soul gets stabbed? Walk it off. Come on. I guess it's funny coming from me, I don't really have a soul.
Number 5. Limbo. Chasm isn't just allied with anyone when it comes to this dark web event. He's allied with one of the most powerful villains around, one of the most powerful people around, Madeline Pryor. Madeline Pryor more recently seemed to be focused on healing, moving past her traumas, not villainy, but it turns out this was all part of a larger plot to get what she wanted most. Madeline Pryor apparently hadn't actually healed, at least not fully, and what she needed to complete the process, or what she needed because the process hadn't been completed maybe, was the memories that were stolen from her. These were the memories of Nate, aka once baby Christopher, growing up. Jean ended up acquiring all of Madeline's memories following the original Inferno event in the comics when Maddie was defeated. Jean ended up in a way becoming like a mom to Nate because of this, because she had an emotional connection to him with all the memories of raising the baby that Maddie had prior. And now Madeline wants all of that back. Well, she wants the backlog of stuff that she missed. She wanted not just the memories of raising baby Christopher, but also the memories of what happened with raising him after she'd missed out on that. And she also wanted all the memories involving her and her death and her funeral. And this was where her allegiance with Chasm basically came in. Chasm is also after his lost memories, which he feels Peter Parker has stolen from him, and aims to get them back himself and also end Peter Parker in a sort of there can only be one type showdown. Number 4. Hallows Eve. Not only is Madeline an ally of Chasm, but so is Hallows Eve. Hallows Eve is actually Janine Godby, who is Ben's love interest. Kind of like his version of Mary Jane, but if Mary Jane had an even more messed up childhood and was also forced into becoming a murderer and a criminal in self-defense, spending most of her adult life in prison. Hallows Eve ends up becoming a villainous sidekick to Chasm and the Goblin Queen in the Dark Web event after Maddie uses the demonic magic of Limbo to give Hallows Eve powers. Hallows Eve can essentially create masks which have different effects on her enemies depending on which one she's wearing and wielding at the time. The symbolism here is kind of in reference to the fact that in her life, Janine has felt she had to assume many different identities in order to survive, which is why Maddie sort of gave her that power. Even her name, Janine, is actually not her original name, but one she adopted when she was on the run, although it is the name she chooses to be addressed and referred to by in preference to her given name, because obviously she has past stuff attached to that she does not want to think about, I imagine. Number 3. Venom. While not as Chasm specific, I feel like this point is still really relevant when it comes to Chasm and his story in Dark Web. Chasm and the Goblin Queen, along with their sidekick Hallows Eve, aren't the only ones who end up allied together in this event. Venom also gets sucked into this villainous team up himself, which might seem odd initially, considering that Venom is Eddie Brock, who isn't even really Venom anymore, but rather is the King in Black following the defeat of Null. Not only that, but Eddie for the last few years has really been more of a straight up hero, not a villain at all. Venom, the symbiote Venom, would go on to bond with Dylan Brock, Eddie's son, but after Eddie ends up in Limbo requesting help from Madeline and Chasm, Maddie sees an opportunity here. She agrees to help Eddie find his son, but in exchange forces him to join her and Chasm's plot, removing Eddie's memories of Dylan. Now this makes him believe he is Venom once more, but after he realizes his other is no longer there and he's alone, he instead becomes the future villainous version of himself, or one of those, Bedlam. Number 2. Gus. Maybe one of the darkest moments of all comes to us in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 14, at least thus far. In this late 2022 issue, Chasm is revealed to be allied with both the Goblin Queen and Hallows Eve, and ends up confronting someone who repeatedly has mistaken him for Peter, insisting that Ben pay him what Peter owes. Well, before Ben had simply responded that, he was not in fact Peter, so just stop talking to me, I'm not Peter. This time around, Ben instead beats the man up and then takes him to Limbo. There, Madeline Pryor kills the man by consuming his soul, and in so doing receives his memories. This tactic then inspires Chasm when it comes to how to best retrieve his memories from Peter. No longer having the device, I believe, that Maxine offered him before, Ben now plans to kill Peter and consume his soul in order to regain the memories lost to him. Not only is that a super dark and terrifying thought and twist, but we also need to acknowledge here that Ben and Janine both became accessories to murder. Number 1. Pain. As if someone wasn't bad enough, it seems the key to understanding Chasm and so many of the characters' narratives present in Dark Web as well is understanding loss and pain. To really understand why Ben becomes Chasm and why he pursues Peter so ruthlessly, you need to understand what his loss feels like. In issue number 14 of Amazing Spider-Man from 2022, Ben describes his loss to Janine and how it feels to him. I've lost a lifetime. I don't know what I was before I woke up in the Jackal's lab. There's nothing and then I'm just there. And everything after that is scrambled. The only memories that seem to punch through, the ones carrying pain. People telling me I'm not real, beyond manipulating me, all the dying, all the loss. I don't remember meeting you, but I remember all the times I lost you. Pain, pain, pain. It's understandable why he and so many others involved in this story seem to be turning to the darker side, because, I mean, they sound to really be hurting. And isn't that how it usually goes? You get hurt, and you usually end up hurting others. Even if on paper that seems like an obvious thing to not do as someone who's been hurt, it never seems to be quite so obvious to characters, or honestly even real world people in the moment. Number 10. Techno-organic virus. For those of you who are joining us after just learning about Cable through his appearance in Deadpool 2, there is so much that you need to know, and so much that might shock you to learn when it comes to this anti-hero. One is that his robot arm and eye are not just cool replacement cybernetic prosthetics. They're actually a part of Cable. His arm and eye were transformed as a result of the techno-organic virus, which has been attacking his body since he was a baby, and which he uses his powers to fend off. Because if it took a hold of him fully, it would kill him. It's actually part of the reason why you don't get to see his psychic abilities used as often, or get to see really how powerful they are, because he's often busy using them to just keep himself alive as he holds back the techno-organic virus. Number 9. Demonic ritual. Nathan Summers, aka Cable, is the son of Madeline Pryor and Scott Summers, and well, kind of Jean Grey, though she was more like his adopted mother than anything. Madeline, Jean's clone, was his biological mother. Jean was given memories of raising baby Nate during a fight with Madeline, which helped her feel like and basically become his mother in a way. Yeah, it was weird. That was when Madeline killed herself. We were all like, wait, why'd you do that? However, it was also a good thing that she got those memories, because Nate's natural mom, Madeline, ended up going crazy as a result of Jean's return and learning that she was, well, a clone of Jean created by Mr. Sinister, which, let's be fair, that would make any of us go crazy. In order to get more power after being seduced by the dark side within her and demons, she agreed to sacrifice baby Nate in a demonic ritual. Fortunately, her attempt was stopped. However, later Apocalypse would kidnap this baby and infect him with the techno-organic virus, which would plague him for pretty much the rest of his life. Side note, pretty much everybody wanted perfect baby Nate. It's pretty crazy, actually. Sinister's whole reason for creating Madeline was to get her to breed with Scott, and as a result create the perfect mutant offspring, which would be baby Nate. So he wanted him to fight over babies. That happens a lot in X-Men. That's what happened with Hope. Everyone's fighting over babies. Number 8. Super OP version. In the Age of Apocalypse alternate universe of Earth 295, a version of Cable exists in Nate Gray, who is also kind of technically his alternate universe half-sibling. Nate Gray was made by Sinister in this reality using genetic materials from Jean Grey and Scott Summers. The major difference between his origins and his half-brother Cable's is that he was made from the original Jean, not her clone, and he was never exposed to the techno-organic virus. As such, Nate Gray is one of the most powerful mutants to ever exist, often going by the codename X-Man. I imagine if there was a classification above Omega level, he'd be that. But for now, we'll just have to settle with him being considered as Omega. He is an insanely powerful psionic mutant with telepathic and telekinetic abilities. He is immortal, can reality warp, and has even been shown to be able to bring the dead back to life. This is likely what Nathan Summers could have been like in terms of power levels had he not contracted the techno-organic virus. But he did. Number 7. He has an evil clone! That's right, Nathan has an evil clone known as Strife. In fact, for a while, Nathan actually thought that he might have been the clone and that the villain Strife was the original Nathan Summers, until Mr. Sinister revealed otherwise. Beyond that, people also thought that for some time, Cable was actually evil. Not only was he originally this very mysterious character in the comics, but even after we got to know him a bit better, he was originally suspected of being the one behind the assassination attempt on Charles Xavier. However, it turned out that this was a ruse of Strife's, who had impersonated Cable to make him look bad, and had actually made the attempt on Xavier by shooting him with a bullet that infected him with the techno-organic virus. In the end, Cable and the rest of the X-Force came together and managed to save Professor X. Whew. He almost died, but then later he does die. Number 6. Was his evil clone. Sort of. It all boiled down to a big showdown between Cable and Strife at the end of the story arc we were just talking about in the last point, which was called Executioner's Song, if you want to look it up, involving the attempted assassination of Charles Xavier. Strife ended up being defeated by Cable when he pulled him into a time vortex. The unfortunate thing is that Cable also kinda got pulled into that time vortex. However, Cable managed to survive, and Strife died. At least, we thought he did. But what really happened was, although his body perished, his consciousness was basically merged with Cable's, resulting in him continuing to exist, but within Cable. Dun dun dun. Yeah, it gets creepy. I like when things get creepy.
Up next at number 5, Sugar Man. Speaking of Ileana, the mission in which Generation Next attempt to go save Ileana results in a bunch of casualties. Colossus essentially ditches the entire team, leaving them for dead. But none of them are ever to be seen again. At least, until like 10 years after the fact and retcons and whatnot. There's a whole thing about it. But let's talk about Ileana's captor here for a sec, the Sugar Man. The Sugar Man is anything but sweet and delicious. He is a disgusting monstrous creature who has been keeping Colossus' sister as his slave. He is a unique creation to Age of Apocalypse, having first appeared in Generation Next issue 2 back in April of 1995, and he likes to regularly torment his human slaves. A student of Mr. Sinister, he's a geneticist placed in charge of the Pacific Northwest's human slave camp called Seattle Core. One of the young members of Generation Next, Mondo, is personally killed by Sugar Man during that rescue mission. Actually, quite a few of them are. But that wasn't the last that we would hear of Sugar Man, unfortunately. More on him in a bit. Moving on to number 4, Psylocke. Pretty much every major X-Men character appears in Age of Apocalypse, except one. Psylocke. While she would later appear in the 10th anniversary X-Men Age of Apocalypse issue 4, the character was completely absent the first time around, and there has never been any indication as to where she was, who she was aligned with, etc. Now we do know that she had some sort of past connection with Wolverine, aka Weapon X of that reality, but it's still a big mystery as to what the mutant was up to during that time. Psylocke was introduced as one of Apocalypse's horsemen though in the Fox feature film Age of Apocalypse, played by Olivia Munn. Up next, number 3, Cyclops and Wolverine. During Age of Apocalypse, there were various different titles during the story event that came out to replace ongoing X-Men titles for a brief period of time. Now one of these included Weapon X, the name of Wolverine on this Earth. Weapon X would briefly replace the Wolverine series during the event. Now in this reality, Logan and Jean Grey are lovers, working for the Human High Council, the leadership of remaining humans. The council wanted to bomb the crap out of Earth, something that the two opposed. Anywho, Mr. Sinister, one of Apocalypse's servants, gets the idea that he can create a mutant powerful enough to defeat Apocalypse by using Jean Grey's genetic material and combining it with Cyclops's, who is also an agent of Apocalypse. Jean is then captured, so naturally Weapon X goes to rescue her, but in the process he encounters Cyclops, which results in one of the most brutal fights that these two rivals have ever had. Logan loses a hand and Cyclops loses an eye. Once a rival, always a rival. And at number 2, Out with a Bang. You know how we mentioned the Human High Council earlier? Well, they're a fun bunch. In contrast to Magneto's X-Men, the extermination of all mutants is totally a viable option for them when it comes to getting rid of Apocalypse. And they also supported the Human Underground Resistance, although secretly. Anywho, the Human High Council decides that they are going to be rid of this threat by bombing the crap out of the planet with nuclear bombs. Fun. Their plan is to get Jean Grey to hold these nukes back just below orbit, but before she can do that, she's killed off by Havoc, causing their plan to backfire, just as Bishop is about to correct the timeline and stop Legion from killing his father. This pretty much destroys the timeline altogether, with the series ending with Magneto, his son, and his wife Rogue watching the incoming blast, eventually being incinerated within the glowing light. And finally, in at number 1, Timeline Escapees. Despite the timeline being destroyed, some of the characters from Earth 295 managed to get out of that timeline, jumping ship to another. Well, the main continuity of Earth 616. Now this includes Sugar Man, unfortunately, who during the climax of the series would shrink himself down, one of his abilities, and pop himself into Colossus' boot, waiting for the opportunity to get the hell out of there. Dark Beast, an evil version of Beast, escaped, along with Blink, Holocaust, and Nate Gray, the Earth 295 version of Cable. Nate would go on to die briefly after teaming up with the X-Men and Spider-Man, but was eventually resurrected, becoming a member of the New Mutants. Blink would go on to lead the Exiles team, hopping around different realities. And Sugar Man stirred up some trouble, of course, having helped the nation of Ganesha become powerful by enslaving mutants. And Dark Beast was sent 20 years into the past of Earth 616, a fact that was later used in retcons in order to have him be the one who created Morlocks. He would go on to join Norman Osborn's Dark X-Men and seemingly die, only to reappear during the 2017 Secret Empire story arc.
Number 10, the 90s movie. Starting off with something fun. There were many a cancelled 90s project, and even earlier actually, and each one is pretty fantastic in an awful kind of way. Though some of them we would have needed. Nicolas Cage's Superman. They've actually been trying to adapt the She-Hulk for years since her origin in 1980. There's been interest, and in the 90s we got close. This was after 2 failed TV projects. There was hopes for this movie. Larry Cohen was set to direct. You may know him from Cellular, Captivity, phone booth, the stuff. 10 months after he was announced, Brigitte Nielsen was set to be She-Hulk. We got to the set photo stage and everything, but it never happened. 90s She-Hulk, I feel like that would have been a mess, which makes me want it more. Number 9. Supporting Tony during Civil War. Like I mentioned in the superhero couples you won't believe exist, Jennifer Walters and Tony Stark have a good relationship, and she ended up supporting him during Civil War, the first one, Civil War 1, which was interesting. So Civil War boiled down to pro-superhero registration, Tony, and anti-superhero registration, Steve. Sometimes going over who sided with who and why could get real convoluted. I mean, yes, Jennifer is a lawyer, but at the same time her cousin is the Hulk, and she's always, or well used to be, supportive of him. So her supporting Tony despite his secret prisons with Reed was interesting, and we needed conflict. It can't just be Tony and Steve punching each other. Still, the pro-registration side was very much presented as wrong, and hence so were the people who supported it. There were claims that this argument was nuanced, which it was, but it wasn't presented that way. Number 8. Competing with Wonder Woman. So Marvel Comics, has long had a bit of a chip on their shoulder that they don't have a female heroine exactly comparable to Wonder Woman. And for me, that's not a dig. Both companies have some amazing female characters, but Wonder Woman is very unique. For a time, there was hope that She-Hulk could be their Wonder Woman. Writer Peter David expressed as much, stating, "She-Hulk has the potential to be our Wonder Woman, a powerful female with a strong moral center and a determination to do what's right. She's also a unique combination of brains and brawn. The ideal She-Hulk story is one that plays on both aspects of her makeup, the intelligence combined with her strength." Quote done. However, there's a little hitch in her origin that bothers modern Marvel, and in their minds keeps She-Hulk from achieving this status, which they appear to currently be trying to assign to Captain Marvel Carol Danvers, and it may result in some changes to She-Hulk's origin in the MCU, but more on that later. Number 7. Breaking the fourth wall. So She-Hulk used to break the fourth wall. In fact, she's notable for being one of the first Marvel characters to do so, some say the first. She had meta-ness in her character and at times appeared to be aware that she was a comic book character and would most frequently make jokes about the comics code, which she was frequently accused of violating. This would add to the humor of her character, though she would never approach what Deadpool would later approach, years later. He wasn't like that when he was first introduced. Number 6. She's beaten Sentry. So She-Hulk is quite the powerhouse, which by the way is now Franklin Richards' superhero name. Fun fact. She-Hulk would accomplish this during Dark Reign and the 4-part series All New Savage She-Hulk. She ends up being enraged after Sentry dismisses her in a fight, so she pummels him to the ground. This is quite impressive given the overpowered status that he occupies in the Marvel Universe. So for her to be able to do that, be afraid. Or perhaps question the power levels of the situation. Is this a Harley taking out Superman and the Flash situation? At separate times, not at the same time. Share your thoughts. I enjoy hearing from you. I really do.
Number 5. Officially registered under the Superhuman Registration Act. During the Superhuman Registration Act and the events of Civil War, Moon Knight is being monitored by Tony Stark. Concerned about his sanity and considering Moon Knight unfit to be a hero, Stark considers arresting Moon Knight. Eventually, Mark reluctantly registers, listening to the voice of Khonshu, who implores him to do so. Unfortunately, he has to undergo and pass a psychiatric examination in order to be approved. Of course, the psychiatrist has no intention of passing Mark after interviewing his multiple personalities, but just as he was about to be failed, Mark uses the will of Khonshu to convince the psychiatrist to approve him. Or rather, Khonshu speaks through Mark. The psychiatrist does just that and also ends up bowing down to him. Ooh, scary stuff. Number 4. Heroic Personas. With an S. You may be familiar with Moon Knight, Mark Spector's vigilante persona, but are you familiar with his other heroic personas? I'm not talking about Mr. Knight, Jake Lockley, or Steve Grant. I'm talking about Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Wolverine, among others. Mark is called on these personas when acting alone to try and bolster his courage. He even impersonated Spider-Man while getting into a fight at a strip club, much to Spider-Man's dismay. Number 3. Marks people for their crimes. In Moon Knight Volume 3, part of the complaints made against Moon Knight while he is wrestling with the Superhuman Registration Act is that he is marking people. While we discussed the face-off situation between he and Bushman on the previous Scary Facts list, this one may be even scarier. As I've said before, Moon Knight is not your typical Marvel superhero. Some may not even consider him a superhero, because he is violent, gruesome, and dark. He marks his victims with the symbol of the moon by carving it into their skin. The idea is probably to teach them a lesson, to mark them and make them remember. However, some of his victims don't seem to learn, and so they get marked multiple times. It will be interesting to see if the MCU adopts this trait of marks. It will be interesting to see if the MCU adopts this. Ooh. Number 2. Watches you in the dark. As scary as this one sounds, it's really kind of sweet. While Moon Knight is often known as being a vigilante who gets his powers and strength from the moon, that is to say he's stronger at night and is known as Khonshu, the Egyptian moon god's servant, he was also at one point a protector of travelers, specifically those of course that traveled at night. He would follow around everyday people who are on their way home from work or just on their way from one place to another. He has even guarded over those who are asleep, traveling in their dreams. Not going to lie, the idea of anyone watching me while I sleep at night creeps me out, even if it's just Moon Knight trying to protect me. Thanks, but also kind of no thanks. Number 1. He's not real. Or is he? Mark Spector has dealt with pondering about whether or not Khonshu is real when it comes to wrestling with his mental illness, making us also wonder at the same thing. But we have always known that at least he is real, right? Wrong. In Moon Knight Volume 3, the writers of the series at the time even try to mess with our reality when it comes to the character's appearance. While being shot at, his attacker demands to know in frustration why none of his bullets seem to be hitting Moon Knight, to which Mark replies, "I'm not real." The way the action sequence is drawn even leaves the reader questioning. The first 6 issues of this Moon Knight run are also maybe some of the neatest. They are also the issues that involve his run-in with ghosts, and who doesn't want to see Moon Knight question his own existence and punch ghosts? The creative team of Warren Ellis, Declan Shalvey, and Jordi Belair, who worked on these issues, did a brilliant job with the series' first arc before leaving to create the series Injection over at Image Comics, which you should also check out if you enjoyed their exploration of Moon Knight's character. Plus, it's also really pretty. Number 10. First appearance. While Gore the God Butcher is mentioned in Thor God of Thunder issue number 1, the character actually makes their first appearance in the following issue, issue number 2. Gore was created by Asad Rabish and Jason Aaron, and is introduced to us as a literal butcher and destroyer of gods. Really, in issue 1 we are introduced to Gore by not just name but by his handiwork, as Thor comes across dead gods of a world that claims they no longer have any to answer their prayers. It turns out that this is not because the gods have forsaken them, but because their gods are literally dead, killed by Gore. In issue number 2, we see Gore pursue Thor, hoping to find other gods and following him. The two face off in the clouds, having a bloody fight where Gore promises to butcher Thor, as he has done to many gods before. Fortunately, he does not succeed, and Thor manages to escape, despite being pretty badly beaten by Gore. However, this issue would set the precedent for the kind of fights you expect to see Gore get into. If y'all thought Hela was bad, just wait till you meet Gore. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists centered around Love and Thunder, which I'm sure is going to have lots of cool stuff in it, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Forsaken. Speaking of potentially being forsaken by your gods, that is exactly what happened to Gore and his people, which was why he became a god butcher in the first place. After losing his entire family due to natural disasters and starvation, Gore rebuked the gods, deciding he did not believe in them. As a result, he was ostracized from his people for his lack of belief. It was then that he stumbled upon 2 gods in a battle between one another and learned that they did actually exist. They simply didn't seem to care. Furious at this revelation, Gore ended up killing both gods, or at least that's what it seemed like, and then began to wonder if there were any others out in the cosmos, deciding he would look and see and kill all gods that he found in revenge for all he had lost due to their inaction. Number 8. The All-Black Necro Sword. How does Gore manage to defeat so many gods? Well, this is largely thanks to his bond with the All-Black, or the Necro Sword, or the All-Black Necro Sword, or the God Slayer. It's got a lot of names. This weapon is actually the first symbiote as well. It is all-powerful and lends to Gore the strength he needs in order to face off with and defeat the gods. And what's more, Gore doesn't just use the All-Black as a weapon, but he also bonds with it, becoming one with the symbiote and essentially through it gaining a sense of immortality for as long as a small piece of the All-Black remains. Gore's consciousness too kind of lives on within it, meaning that from the All-Black he can live on and essentially reform in a way. Number 7. Null the King in Black, and also known as the God of Symbiotes. Gore and Null kind of have a history, albeit a quite brief history. In case you were wondering where the All-Black came from as a symbiote, it did come from Null himself. Null had set out on a mission to destroy all those that represented light in the universe, seeking to destroy in essence all of the good gods. He created his firstborn, the All-Black, which was a powerful weapon that he used in battle to carry out his mission. However, he ended up falling during this time. As Null lay temporarily defeated, Gorr came upon him and took the All-Black for himself. The golden god that Null fought begged Gorr for help, which Gorr ignored as he felt he'd been ignored, instead choosing to kill the god in response. He probably thought the dark god Null was also dead as well, but of course we know that Null didn't die there and instead lived on for a long time thereafter. Number 6. An ancient evil. Not only does Gorr have the All-Black, which is considered to be an ancient embodiment of evil itself, but he too is also an ancient villain. Gorr might be newer when it comes to Marvel Comics history, but within the lore of the world, he has been alive for thousands of years and spent millennia hunting down and murdering gods, which means at this point he's pretty much an expert when it comes to his capabilities and his skill set. That will also likely be Gorr's story previous to when we meet him in the MCU, meaning he'll be a devastating foe for both Thor Odinson and Jane Foster's mighty Thor to go up against.
Moving on to number 5, brains, brains, brains. Venom eats brains. This is because brains contain something called phenethylamine, a substance that is also found in chocolate. Another fun fact about Venom is that he loves chocolate for this sole reason, although it's not a scary fact, so it didn't really get its own number. Anyway, because of this, Venom craves phenethylamine, which is a neurotransmitter found within the human brain. Now in 1996, we first witnessed him eat his victims' brains on panel, with Eddie Brock being horrified by it. This went down in Venom the Hunger issue 1. Brock was so traumatized by his actions via Venom that he had to temporarily separate from the symbiote, making Venom promise that it would never eat another brain while Brock was his host and stick to his chocolate diet instead. Although once Brock was no longer the host, that changed, but more on that in a sec. Moving on to number 4, Venom feeds off cancer. If the brain thing wasn't bad enough, Venom's diet also consists of large quantities of cancer. Yes, Venom feeds off of cancerous cells, so to speak. Or at least he did briefly. In 2005, it was revealed that one of the reasons why Venom was so keen on bonding with Eddie Brock wasn't because of their mutual dislike of Spider-Man, although apparently that still played a big part. The reason is that Brock was suffering from cancer this entire time, and the symbiote was feeding off of the adrenaline that the cancer was producing in Brock's body. In turn, he was keeping Brock alive. Since then, there's been a lot of little retcons concerning their relationship, since many fans felt that that was a stupid reason to have them connect in the first place. In at number 3, a history of sexual assault. Okay, so this one is really bad. In Venom Volume 1, Issue 12, a corporation known as the Ararat Corporation tries to use the Venom symbiote for their own agenda. Having recently parted ways with Eddie Brock, the symbiote did not have a host at the time, so the corporation attempted to make that happen. That did not go so well, since Venom killed most of the potential hosts that they threw at him. To make matters worse, they sent in 2 potential hosts for him at once, a mental patient and a serial killer. What does Venom do? Well, he decides to screw with them. He jumps between the men to learn more about them, and discovers that the serial killer murdered 4 men who had sexually assaulted him in prison. So Venom decides to bond to the mental patient and attack the serial killer, stating, I quote, "It's going to happen again." Yeah, that's Then the assault happens off panel, with the serial killer being revealed to be deceased afterwards. This isn't the only time that the symbiote has pulled some whack stuff as far as sexual assault goes. There was a point during Venom the Madness, a 3-part miniseries that ran between 1993 and 1994, where Venom tried to assault Brock's girlfriend at the time, Beck. The idea behind this story is that there is no true symbiosis between Host and Clintar, and when conflict arose between the 2 identities, that results in a 3rd entity called Insanity. It was the Insanity who decided to assault people, apparently. Luckily, the assault never actually happens, because Juggernaut storms in and fights Venom, which might be one of the only times readers were excited to see Juggernaut save the day. In at number 2, Venom is a cannibal. One of Venom's more violent periods is when the symbiote had Mac Gargan as his host. Gargan, aka the Scorpion of Spider-Man fame, had a more nefarious temperament than other hosts the likes of Eddie Brock or Flash Thompson, so Venom fully indulged in some behavior the symbiote hadn't tapped into since his early days on panel, and worse. This iteration of Venom was straight up into eating people. Gargan's time with Venom is perhaps one of Venom's most gruesome. Not only would he eat brains, but he also ate body parts. He once ate an entire scroll. Brock was able to keep those urges at bay, but when it was Gargan's turn, the symbiote was insatiable, eating the bodies of his victims. That's cannibalism, friends. And finally, in at number 1, Venom has committed genocide. Planetary genocide. It's something that quite a few Planetary genocide. It's something that quite a few characters in Marvel's roster have on their resume, including Venom. In Venom Space Knight issue 8, Venom decides to get something off his chest. He admits to his then host Flash Thompson that he was responsible for killing everyone on the homeworld of one of his first hosts. As the story goes, Venom had been badly wounded after separating from his very first host, and in the aftermath he bonded with another alien, whose name he never mentions. This alien was different though. It contained a bottomless rage inside of it that took advantage of Venom, using Venom's powers to kill everyone on its homeworld. As Venom puts it, I quote, "My first host came back to his homeworld and murdered it. We murdered it. He was a cruel and twisted soul who showed me the cruelty and twistedness of my own soul." Venom attributes this event to why he was so full of hate himself initially.
Number 10. Beyond Corporation. What happened to make Ben Reilly become the villainous being known as Chasm? That's a good question. Really, this is all explained in the pages of the Spider-Man Beyond event or storyline, which had a ton of tie-ins as well as extra bonus stories with their Point Bay issues, which occurred in between issues of the main storyline, diving deeper into the intricacies of smaller story points as the story unfolded. The Beyond event was a weekly release, so there was lots to read for those of us who followed along with this event. But overall, I'd say this event was worth all the reading, with lots of fun moments as well as many twists and turns to keep us guessing, as well as keep us eager to turn every single page. One of the highlights for me was definitely the team up between Mary Jane and Black Cat. In the Beyond event, Ben Reilly takes over the mantle of Spider-Man after the Beyond Corporation gains the rights to the Spider-Man name and hires him to be basically their Spider-Man. Peter for a while is in a coma, leaving Ben mostly uncontested for the Spider-Man moniker, except for Miles of course, who is actually served papers and threatened to change his name or deal with being sued. Eventually, it's revealed that Beyond was manipulating Ben's mind, and even that Ben had signed off on this, wanting to forget some less desirable moments in his past. However, after he catches on to their real purpose, a violent mind wipe goes wrong, leaving integral memories of Ben damaged and causing him to forget who he is and kind of have like a bit of an identity crisis. In the end, he chooses to die rather than accept help from Peter and falls into a pit of green ooze as the Beyond Corporation headquarters in New York is destroyed. Or at least, we thought he was dead. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here on Top 10 Nerd and you love hearing about how some more heroic characters can become evil, we have a Top 10 Evil Alternate Versions playlist for you to check out, where you can learn about all the evil alternates that exist in the multiverse. Number 9. The Ooze. In reality, Ben fell into the pit of ooze and was reborn again, this time with improved oozified powers. These newfound powers give him an enhanced spider sense, which also lashes out at the danger that he senses. He can also hit people with blasts of ooze now too. Ooze-tastic. Number 8. Dark Web. What is Dark Web? Well, it's the current ongoing Spider-Man event, following what happened in Beyond, which we already touched on and which resulted in the creation of Chasm. Ben Reilly now has a new identity and a new purpose. He has been warped by his loss of memories completely, and probably from falling into a bunch of ooze. He decides the best course of action now is to take out those responsible for his fall from grace, and he decides to ally himself with others who have been wronged in order for them to all achieve their own similar but different objectives. Chasm's plan is to defeat Peter Parker, who he sees as a threat, and who he ultimately blames for all the things that have befallen him, basically feeling that like Peter is kind of keeping memories from him, when really that's not what Peter wants to be doing. Dark Web is about these various villains coming together to redeem what they feel they are owed, having all been twisted in some way by past traumas, and for some of them kind of current traumas. Really, it's an event about confronting the pain others have caused you and all the various ways you can deal with, and you can hopefully potentially heal from that. Number 7. Chasm. Why the name Chasm? Does it mean anything to Ben? Why, yes, of course it does. Chasm is a name that Ben chose in reference to the memories that he is missing, because without them there is a great void in his mind. You might say, a great chasm? What memories did Ben lose? Well, chiefly he lost the memories that made him who he was, a hero. He lost the formative memories that he shares with Peter of their childhood, a childhood that Peter actually lived but Ben only remembers. He also lost some of the memories that Beyond wanted him to lose, ideally, which means that he wouldn't have remembered uncovering their secrets. So in that way, it kind of makes sense that when it comes to who he blames for the missing memories and the lack of a sense of self, he would blame Peter for this more than not. Although I do believe at the end of Beyond he does kind of figure out that Beyond was still kind of behind everything, but I do question how much of the memories he has of that are there. There is also the fact that Maxine Danger, head of the division of Beyond that Ben did work for, implied that the only way to get back his memories would basically be to use one of their devices to forcefully take said memories from Peter, pitting the two against one another during the final showdown in that event. Number 6. The Calling. We also learn near the beginning of Dark Web of how Chasm may not have even been the major player behind the plot here. As Chasm, Ben is suffering. He is questioning who he is, and every thought and memory he has left seems to only cause him more suffering, more pain. He has been raiding Beyond safe houses, as we learn in issue number 14 of the Amazing Spider-Man series, and finding all kinds of tech there. And it seems to be one of the only things that brings him any sense of relief. Well, maybe other than Janine's presence, who, you know, she obviously, I think, makes him feel a little better. The tech he claims feels like some kind of key. He knows that Beyond was using it in some kind of project that was near completion called Project Purgatory, and he believes with his genius he can actually get it to work. And it seems that is the key to the calling he is feeling, reaching out to him from a place. A place called...
And at 5, personal movie. During his work on X-Men Apocalypse, editor John Ottoman wondered what it would be like if Beast had his own spin-off movie. No, I did not make a mistake with the name, this is a story, follow me. When he had this idea, he approached his assistant Brian Burton, who was an aspiring screenwriter. Ottoman was skeptical that Beast could hold his own movie, but Burton, seeing an opportunity, cranked out a script in 2 weeks. I'm pretty sure that's kinda tough. The film would have had Beast teaming up with Wolverine and Professor X to take down the big bad, but the real villain would have been Mr. Sinister, who would have served as this arc's Thanos, being the big bad who was orchestrating things like Thanos was in the Infinity Saga of the MCU. They, with this idea, had also wrote a late 80s era Omega Red film where Mr. Sinister would have been testing the X-Men. The idea of an Omega Red film is something that I've seen several fans mention on various forums and Reddit posts, so the fact that this could have been a thing if they hadn't been working on Dark Phoenix and been able to read the script just breaks my heart. They didn't read the script because they didn't want Dark Phoenix to be influenced by the Omega Red script, so. But it could still maybe happen. But they would have to cut Logan out since Hugh Jackman left the role. But this would come after a Beast movie, so if we see a Beast movie, you can expect an Omega Red movie. I doubt it. And at 4, original enemy. Well, yes, Omega Red is known for being a villain of the X-Men, or Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe. This might not have been his original purpose for creation. After being arrested, Arcady fell into the hands of the KGB, also known as the, I'm sorry for butchering this, Komiet Gursalavani Bezopansoni. No, that's not it, whatever. Or the Russian State Security Committee, which was the primary security agency of the Soviet Union, who wanted to use Arcady for their super soldier program in order to create a soldier like Captain America. So if things had gone differently, he could have ended up becoming a Captain America villain. But then they implanted cybernetic enhancements and then tentacles, so there wasn't really a place for him in the soldier, war-prone world of Captain America, who always loves reminding people how he was frozen for 70 years. How would you feel if Omega Red was a Captain America villain rather than an X-Men villain? Sound off in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious. I think I prefer him as an X-Men villain though. And at 3, defeated Tony Stark. Omega Red is an extremely badass character that definitely can handle most people in a fight, once fighting Wolverine for 17 hours straight, which is unbelievable because I struggle to even stay awake for 17 hours, and I know for a fact that I'm gonna fall asleep on my way home tonight. However, when Omega Red has fought Tony Stark, he seems to be fairly well matched. In Iron Man 297, Omega Red comes close to defeating our gold titanium alloyed hero during a battle with Modem, when Omega Red is telling Modem that she is in fact Alinka Barankova, but she didn't believe him. While he battled Modem, Tony was able to recover, but there was another point where Omega Red was actually able to defeat Tony Stark, but I can't remember the issue or even find the issue online. So if you do know, make sure to mention it in the comments because I swear that it actually happened. I swear he actually beat him. I just honestly can't remember it for the life of me. Help. In it 2, the army. When Arcady developed his mutation, his family became scared of him, and his bloodlust developed after he started mutilating animals and started killing old beggars. Due to him being afraid, Arcady's brother ended up betraying him by ratting him out to the authorities. He later joined the Russian army where he became part of the Spetsnaz. Despite serving in the army, he also continued his crimes. He started to prey on young children, especially young girls, as he kidnapped and killed them. His crimes went unnoticed for a time until he went and got himself transferred to a Soviet outpost near the Arctic Circle, where the the disappearance and death of several children were finally noticed by other Russian soldiers, since, you know, it's the Arctic Circle. It's not like there's a lot of people up there, not even Canadians, sorry to break it to you. After discovering the atrocious crimes he committed, he was executed by the Red Army, but his unmanifested mutant powers saved him from death, which prompted his superiors to use him for their super soldier program, where he was given the super soldier serum and all the cybernetic enhancements. Finally, in at number 1, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Warning, potential spoilers for the Disney Plus series Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Okay, now you're gone. Posted late into the night on February 23rd, an anonymous 4chan user posted a plot synopsis for an episode they supposedly saw for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where Sam and Bucky have to work with Zemo to track down a crime syndicate known as the Alchemists. They, along with Zemo, go to Madripoor where they meet Omega Red. The character could be a gateway for the X-Men into the MCU, due to his deep link with Wolverine and the others, but comic origins haven't stopped the MCU from changing things to fit their own canon, since they are on a separate Earth. However, since Omega Red was originally an attempt to make a Captain America clone, perhaps this is the story they will go with. How would you feel about the X-Men being introduced into the MCU, both in general and in this fashion? Let me know below in the comments.
In at number 10, Altered Timeline. For starters, let's talk about the timeline. When Legion kills Charles Xavier, it drastically changes the way events pan out in the timeline. Without Professor Xavier around, Apocalypse attacks 10 years sooner than he does in the original 616 timeline, with him succeeding and taking over the Earth. Magneto leads a mutant resistance and sends Bishop back in time to prevent Xavier's murder, ultimately undoing the timeline altogether, thankfully. What else? Well, Magneto actually forms the X-Men in this reality, just as Apocalypse begins his war. But they weren't as coordinated as Xavier's X-Men were, and therefore North America defenses who stand up against Apocalypse and his horsemen are seriously lacking. In addition to that, many of our beloved heroes outside of the X-Men are killed or just cease to exist. As for humans, well, Apocalypse initiates something called cullings, mass genocide of humans that leaves millions of them dead. Ugh. And at number 9, Magneto and Rogue. Age of Apocalypse has many weird and twisted moments. Perhaps one of the strangest events to occur in its narrative was that Magneto and Rogue shacked up. The two got married and had a kid. So let's jump back for a second. When the storyline starts off, Gambit and Rogue are still a couple. Gambit, hoping to find a way to physically touch Rogue, brings her to Magneto for help. Of course, the magnetic mastermind is able to find a way to touch Rogue via creating a microscopic field. Now, touch is kind of a big deal for her, so having the ability to get physical with her made Magneto hella appealing. But that's not all. Scarlet Witch, aka Wanda Maximoff, Magneto's daughter, would receive a fatal injury in the series, causing her death. But she was not entirely gone. A piece of her mind was within Rogue, and Wanda had requested that Rogue look after Magneto as her dying wish. So it actually kind of feels a little bit weird because of that, because there's a piece of his daughter in her and they're boning. Rogue eventually breaks the news to Gambit, who then sulks away, lamenting on how it's time for him to be alone again. Oh. Kinda feel bad for Gambit in this case. Pretty important in Age of Apocalypse. Moving on to number 8, prequels galore. For almost 10 years, Earth 295 was considered to be a dead reality, but Marvel still took advantage of its popularity and published a variety of prequels that took place in that timeline. Blink, a character who would end up in the 616 timeline, more on that later, would have his own prequel solo 4-issue miniseries that was primarily set in the Negative Zone. X-Man, the series that had initially replaced Cable during the Age of Apocalypse event, returned as a prequel, depicting a younger Nate Summers. There was even a prequel that followed Corsair, aka Christopher Summers, Scott's dad, returning to Earth to be reunited with Scott and Havoc, aka Alex's brother, titled Sinister Bloodlines. It wasn't just prequels though. An X-Men Age of Apocalypse one-shot would come out in 2005, followed by a 6-issue limited series. Speaking of, in at number 7, the limited series. In 2005, that limited series called X-Men Age of Apocalypse was released, which took place a year after the events of the original Age of Apocalypse. But it seemed to retcon much of the damage the world had taken in that initial story, giving readers a USA that felt very similar to the Earth 616 version. Magneto, who is the acting director of Mutant Affairs, is working to take down any surviving mutants allied with Apocalypse, while Weapon X, aka Wolverine, roams Canada, murdering off any of the villain's old allies and followers. Throughout the series, it's revealed that Jean Grey is alive as well. You'll see in a bit why that is not really, okay. But, maybe that's just a subjective opinion. And at number 6, Murderous. Age of Apocalypse transforms many of our favorite heroes into murderous villains of sorts. This includes Cyclops and his brother Havoc, with the latter being far worse than the former. The brothers worked under Mr. Sinister at the breeding pits. Guess what those are? And Havoc was known to be utterly psychotic. He would actually go on to murder not only Jean Grey, but his own brother, who he had a deep-rooted jealousy of, only to be ended by Weapon X, aka Logan, by the the end of the story. Colossus also does some pretty messed up stuff too. When Magneto's X-Men storm Apocalypse's stronghold in an attempt to retrieve their captive leader and also create a massive diversion, Colossus loses his cool, big time. His sister Ileana plays a big role in this. Now for context, in the Generation Next series of the story event, we follow a team of young mutants trained by Colossus and his then wife Shadowcat. Magneto sends the team to go rescue Colossus' sister, who has a very special power. She's the last surviving transdimensional teleporter. Magneto intended to use her in order to send Bishop back in time to prevent the timeline from occurring. But during their siege on the stronghold, Colossus loses his crap over potentially losing his sister, which results in him going on a murderous rampage during the battle. Iceman attempts to get him to chill out, pun fully intended, but Colossus smashes him to smithereens. Then when Kitty Pryde, aka Shadowcat, his wife, tries to talk him down, she steps in his way, believing that he won't hurt her despite Gambit's warnings. And Gambit was right. Colossus ends up killing her. So then Gambit has to put him down.
Number 5. Omega level telepath. Especially if you have discovered the character of Cable through another form of media other than comics, you might be surprised to hear this fact. Being the biological son of Jean Grey's clone and the adopted son of Jean Grey herself, Nathan's telepathic powers are, well, they're off the charts. We don't see him flex them though as often as his combative skills, because the techno-organic virus requires him to invest some of his telepathic and telekinetic strength just to keep it at bay. But when he does decide to use these powers, even though they are both kind of restricted, it's amazing what he can still accomplish. Telepathic feats include being able to tap into the mind of everyone on the planet all at once, repairing years of brain damage within Deadpool's mind with just a touch, and defeating hundreds of militia just by influencing them to not fight him instead. That'd be cool if someone's like, I'm gonna kill you, and you could just be like, no. And they're like, oh okay, I see your point. Emma Frost was barely able to shield a conversation from Cable even while using the full power of Cerebro. That's just how powerful of a telepath he is. Just to put that into perspective for you. I love Emma's face too in that panel. She's just like, trying. It's so funny when you have to see people like telepathically do things in their minds. It's like I'm fighting, it's intense. Number 4. Almost defeated the entire Avengers team. During the 4-part miniseries Avengers X Sanction, which happened right before things got crazy in Avengers vs. X-Men, Cable vowed to take on the Avengers, who he believed would be responsible for killing Hope Summers, his adopted daughter, in the future. Killing her in the future. She's not from the future. Well, she's kind of from the future. Sometimes. Anyways, Cable ended up capturing 2 of the big team leaders, defeating them in combat, namely Captain America and Iron Man. I know, pretty impressive, especially considering that Nathan was dying at the time as the techno-organic virus fought to fully take over his body. In the end, however, Cyclops and Hope convinced Cable that this wasn't the right move. They freed the Avengers and cured Cable fully of the techno-organic virus, with a little help from Hope's access to the Phoenix Flames. Always helpful to have someone who has a spark of Phoenix inside them. Number 3. Young again. Cable has been young a few times in the comics. He continues to have this serious case of Benjamin Button syndrome that most people are not a huge fan of. People tend to actually like old, grizzled, white-haired Cable better than young, grizzled, also kind of white-haired Cable. I personally like both myself, but currently in the comics we appear to be stuck with the young Cable, who you will notice appears in the Dawn of X relaunch in titles like Fallen Angels, X-Men, and in his own series Cable Volume 4, which by the way recently came out on March 11th if you were interested in checking out issue number 1. Young Cable actually killed his older self after the two clashed over what to do about some time-displaced younger X-Men. Isn't that just how it goes? Don't you hate when you get in a fight with yourself and kill your older version? I know I do. Number 2. Cured himself. Cable has been cured of the techno-organic virus a few times. One of the most astounding times that this happened in the comics was when he cured himself of it. The cure for Legacy virus had reportedly somewhat weakened the power of his infection, and when that happened, Cable took this as his opportunity to fight back. Concentrating, he was momentarily able to rewrite his DNA and remove the virus from within him. Yeah, that's right, he was able to rewrite his DNA. That's insane. Also, what a 90s story this was. Oh, the 90s, when anything was possible. You could rewrite your own DNA if you wanted. Number 1. Future Cannonball? The character of Cable was originally created by Rob Liefeld and Louise Simonson. The idea behind the character in terms of what they were tasked with creating was just a man of action. Someone who could act as a foil to Professor Charles Xavier, his parallel opposite basically. Thus, the mysterious time traveler from the future, Cable, was created. Originally we didn't know a lot about him, and it was right writer Chris Claremont, who later came up with the idea to make him a future version of baby Nate Summers, Maddie and Scott's baby boy, but all grown up and raised in the future. Liefeld actually had a different backstory in mind for the character and didn't actually like the idea of him being Nathan Summers originally. His plan had been to make Cable the mentor of Sam Guthrie, Cannonball. It would later be revealed that Cable was actually Guthrie from the future, but he just didn't remember this. This is supposedly the real reason why Sam Guthrie was made an external, helping to explain how powerful his future self was and would become, and likely also why it was never really brought up again later in the comics that Cannonball was so powerful because he was an external. In fact, Cable himself would later state that Guthrie being an external was nothing more than a rumor, and that there was no truth to it at all, retconning the power level Cannonball had once been stated to be at, because now it's not really relevant anymore, because we decided to go with a different story for him. Number 10. He died. He got his powers while working as a mercenary for hire for a man named Raoul Bushman, who was looking for an Egyptian tomb. Bushman was a ruthless sort, enjoying the violence he brought to others and killing people to try and find what he wanted. Mark did not enjoy this side of Bushman and punched Bushman after he killed the archaeologist on the expedition, Peter Alrune, in an attempt to protect Peter's daughter, Marlene. During this fight, Bushman ended up getting the upper hand and left him for dead. Fortunately, he was able to make his way back to the tomb before he went unconscious. Marlene and the rest of the exploration team carried his body into the tomb and laid him out below an idol belonging to an Egyptian god, Khonshu. Mark had a vision involving Khonshu, who promised him life in exchange for his loyalty to the god and commitment to do Khonshu's bidding. Mark accepted. Later, Spectre would ponder that he had simply been having near-death hallucinations. Ooh, spooky. Number 9. Military service. Before he was Moon Knight, Mark Spector served in the military as a Marine, and even went to Iraq. While you might not think this is scary, war is actually terrifying. To add to this intensity of his service, he also began having episodes while on tour. Mark actually suffers from dissociative personality disorder, but we'll touch more on that later. He at one point is shown in the comics coming to after seeming to have wandered outside of the military camp, following a voice that called to him in the dark under the full moon. Not only is this in and of itself terrifying, as it could have compromised his fellow soldiers' safety, but concern is expressed by those who leave the camp to find him when they tell him he has actually walked into a minefield. Boom. Number 10. Rare blood disease. What's a Hulk to do when they lack control over their own monstrous transformation? Why, recruit a vampire to help you do so, of course. Monster to monster, so to speak. Before She-Hulk could control her transformation, she would become the Hulk in a similar way to Bruce, whenever she got angry. It wasn't until Savage She-Hulk issue 11 and 12 where she almost died from a rare blood disease and sought the help of Morbius, vampire and brilliant hematologist, that this changed. He gave her a serum that cured her disease and also allowed her to gain control of her transformative abilities. And voila, we were given the capable and in control She-Hulk that we still have today. Number 9. She almost died. Jennifer Walters actually became She-Hulk as a result of almost dying. When Bruce goes to find Jen in issue 1 of the Savage She-Hulk, we find out she's been practicing criminal law, and it is her involvement in the criminal world that gets her shot at for working to put criminals away. Bruce is with her at the time and works hard to keep cool so he can help Jen before she bleeds out. He breaks into a doctor's house conveniently across the street, where no one is home, and uses the doctor's medical equipment to give her an emergency blood transfusion. Whose blood does he use? Why, his own, of course. It's all he has at the time. Yeah, there's a lot of suspension of disbelief required in the first few pages of this issue. Anyways, while recovering in the hospital, the goons who shot her return to finish the job. When becoming enraged, she transforms into the She-Hulk. Talk about a frightening situation. Number 8. Her addiction. Walters has never really made it a secret in the comics that she prefers being the She-Hulk. In fact, the interesting thing about her relationship with being green versus her cousins is that while Bruce thinks of his Hulk ego as something that is a hindrance to his humanity, Jennifer thinks of it as an asset. She finds that she is more confident as She-Hulk. Keeping in mind she still also has a level head when she transforms, but still, it is kind of scary how much she loses herself in her transformation. Or at least thinks she does. In She-Hulk Volume 2 issue 19, we see her condemned as being a She-Hulk addict in court by Mallory Book, and from there Jennifer decides to explore what it is about herself as She-Hulk that she is addicted to. The sweet resolution to this horror story is she realizes that either way, she is still herself, and regardless of whether she is human or Hulk, she never backs down from a fight. Yay, confidence boosts. What was that? Number 7. All the hate surrounding She-Hulk's Disney Plus series. One of the scariest things in my mind, as well as the silliest, is all the hate surrounding She-Hulk right now. Fortunately, it is being combated by as much love as fans of her comics can muster, as well as a personal Twitter welcome from the man who portrays her cousin himself in the MCU, Mark Ruffalo. But still, there are some people who were next level triggered by Disney's announcement surrounding the She-Hulk series. People are making comments involving how her show will just involve her making sandwiches in the kitchen. And I even read a comment where someone angrily wrote in all caps, "Hulk doesn't need to be a girl," as though they thought Disney was gender swapping the Hulk for the series. Another comment stated, "We have female Thor, female Hulk, what's next, Spider-Woman?" I hope so. I personally love Jessica Drew. These comments make me want to send these ignorant nerds to make me a sandwich in the kitchen while I read them some sensational She-Hulk. I'll share my sandwich with them too. Number 6. Married to Man-Wolf. So, to me, it isn't super scary that she was in fact married to John Jameson, aka Man-Wolf. Just because he's a wolf doesn't mean he doesn't deserve some love, and the two were kind of a cute monster mash pair. The scary part to me about their marriage and love affair was that it was never real. I mean, it was real, they got married, but it only happened because they were both under the influence of Star Fox's power. That's right, he made them feel love for each other and eventually get married. Once She-Hulk finds out about this in She-Hulk Volume 2, the same series in which she and John were actually shown to have fallen in love and get married, she ends up filing for a divorce and annulling their marriage. Could you imagine a world where you were forced to stay with a partner, in fact marry them, but you thought you had wanted to, only to find out that you were somehow manipulated into that? That sounds pretty terrifying to me. Not to mention, as sweet as John can be, he also spent a lot of their time together trying to get Jennifer to give up She-Hulk entirely. Not cool, John. And definitely not cool, Star Fox. Number 5. Star Fox's defense. Even more terrifying is somehow Jennifer ended up as Star Fox's defense lawyer. Granted, this was before she knew she was being manipulated, but really, Jennifer? This case involved a lot of instances of evidence against Star Fox. It's made pretty clear that he was actually manipulating even the court the whole while. You might be thinking, I know what's happening here. When they had the trial later on Titan where She-Hulk found out about her false relationship with John, she was going to find out that Star Fox was manipulating her the whole time. But no, they did not give her an easy way out. She actually discovered that while she had been influenced by Star Fox in regards to her feelings about Man-Wolf, she had not been influenced into defending him or sleeping with him. Yikes! If anything, the way this whole Star Fox sexual assault thing was handled and written is just scary in and of itself. Number 4. Grey She-Hulk. Even though Bruce and Jen are very different kind of Hulks, sometimes their plights are one and the same. After the death of Bruce Banner in the Civil War II event, Jen was shaken to her core and became very connected with her darker side. More specifically, she went grey. If you're familiar with the Hulk but not as familiar with the Hulk family, you may think that doesn't sound so bad. After all, when Bruce typically goes grey, he becomes much more level-headed, smart, like Jen normally is when she's green. So what happens when Jennifer Walters goes grey? Well, she becomes more like Bruce's standard Green Hulk, a monster who is hard to connect with. And trust me when I tell you, this side of her is pretty scary. In Hulk Volume 5, which featured Jennifer Walters as the main character in the absence of Bruce, we get to see her deal with the monster within, a side that is not normally explored with her character. Also, it's just really well written, so yay! Number 3. That time she ripped Vision in half. If you needed more proof that She-Hulk is someone you don't want to mess with, here it is. Before the events of House of M and Avengers Disassembled, She-Hulk is influenced by Scarlet Witch and flies into a rage and becomes the villain for a few issues. By the way, in case you were unaware, the more angry She-Hulk gets, the stronger she gets. She even rips Vision in half. Granted, he's kinda like dead at the time anyways, but still, she rages real hard, knocking down Cap without so much as a second thought. Boom, take that, Cap. Number 2. Survivor of Assault. In the newer Avengers series from 2018, we see She-Hulk wrestle with her appearance in issue 20. In this issue, we see her ugly side fighting her old version, her pinup side. Old She-Hulk berates new She-Hulk for being ugly, a stick in the mud, too serious. The two sides of herself end up getting so heated over the idea of what her identity should be that they devolve to blows over who is right. Jen also opens up about her feelings on being She-Hulk. Yeah, she's had fun and felt confident, and she's looked amazing, but she is fighting for her freedom in this issue to be ugly, because of all the other stuff that she has had to deal with, namely sexual assault. She opens up about unwanted advances and having nude pictures of her published, and laments how her cousin Bruce has always envied her falsely, as although she was admired, she also has had to deal with a lot of sleazeballs groping her, something Bruce never seems to have to deal with. Ladies, in comics. It's hard. Number 1. Her and Bruce hooked up. Yeah. This almost happened in canon in one of the Incredible Hulk annuals, and everyone was pretty shocked. And then it actually happened. On an alternate Earth in Old Man Logan. And everyone was just straight up grossed out. While it isn't shown in the series, it is implied that Jen was the only one left for Bruce to mate with, but that still doesn't really excuse the behavior here. It's also never specified as to whether or not this interaction is consensual. Though they have more than one kid together, so I certainly hope so. Ugh. Number 10. Ebony Blade. The Black Knight is nigh immortal when wielding his magic sword. Originally his power was attached to his ebony blade, a sword forged by Merlin out of meteorite. In fact, Percy would often pretend to be pretty clueless in order to hide his identity, but would transform whenever he brandished his sword. Not going to lie, I'm excited to see a hero that brings an ancient blade to an alien tech fight. I personally love Thor's weapon Mjolnir and the idea of someone fighting with old school but magic imbued weapons. It just makes me think of more classic mythological or historical tales. The tales that actually inspire even our high-tech heroes, to be honest. And I like when we are able to explore and get down to earth. Beyond that, this sword also comes with a curse that at one point transformed the current Black Knight, Dane Whitman, into a living statue. Number 9. He died. Well, the original Black Knight did. Sir Percy of Scandia was once the Black Knight, and after using the ebony blade to fight Mordred, he died. You might be remembering that I mentioned in my last point that he was, nigh immortal when wielding the blade, and you would be right, I did say that. However, Mordred was wielding a sword himself made of the same meteorite, and when Black Knight was stabbed with the blade, it went through even his ebony armor made from the same meteor as well, and he was wounded. How big was this meteor? Just making tons of weapons and armor out of it. Ergo, Percy was nigh invulnerable, but not quite, you see. He died from his injuries. But Merlin enchanted the blade with Percy's spirit, so his legacy would live on and pass down to whomsoever wielded the blade. So, not quite dead. Number 8. Trapped in the 12th century. To some, this may sound like a fantasy, but the 12th century was a pretty gross time, let's be honest. It was a time when many starved and often died of disease or the common cold. This was a time before advance where even if you didn't die in a highway robbery, your end was probably just around the corner, coming to you soon. Where, 30 years old was considered old. Granted, the Black Knight Dane Whitman didn't have to worry about these horrors as much as we would, as he was living in a comic book fantasy and is a superhero, so he kind of has immunity to some of these things. So how did this happen? How did he get to the 12th century? Well, Dane's consciousness was transported back in time after he was seemingly turned into stone by the Enchantress. The Avengers discovered this after trying to transform him back. Dane claimed though that he was good in the 12th century, where he was inhabiting the body of his ancestor Eobar Garrington, and busy protecting the past. The Avengers let him be, and he eventually returned to his own body back in the present when Eobar's body perished. So, does that mean that Dane is his own ancestor? Like, that's some Back to the Future stuff. Number 7. Villainous Past. Before Dane became the Black Knight, but after Sir Percy, there was Garrett. Nathan Garrett is an interesting fellow. He is a descendant of Percy's, who was a brilliant scientist and geneticist, who stumbled upon the tomb of the Black Knight and took up his mantle. However, he wasn't quite as noble as his ancestor, and he decided to use the powers of the Black Knight and Ebony. However, he wasn't quite as noble as his ancestor, and he decided to use the name of Black Knight and take up a life of crime, using his intellect to build gadgets that would assist him, including a robotic flying horse. Crazy. He was also apparently a communist and a spy for the People's Republic of China, which seems kinda random. In the end, as he lay dying, he repented and confessed everything to his nephew Dane, imploring him to take up the mantle and redeem the Black Knight's name. Dane agreed and his uncle Nathan died. Poetic. Number 6. Ganyosin. Okay, so this point is mostly scary because it is scary hard to understand. That, and if you imagine being linked to a person in this way, potentially against your will, it doesn't really sound fun. Basically, the Ganyosin is like a psychic soulmate type bond, and this is how we will probably see Kit Harington's character, the Black Knight, brought into the MCU. Okay, here we go. So, the Black Knight in the comics was for a while linked to Circe, one of my favorite Eternals, through this bond called the Gan-Yozen. The bond was created by Icarus after Dane went all crazy and tried to completely wipe out Circe because she kinda turned him down for a date. Or not really Dane, but Proctor, who is kind of like a bizarro evil alternate of Dane's. Anyways, Icarus creates a bond between Circe and Proctor, but this also affects the main continuity Dane from Earth 616. The two have a complex relationship. After the bond between them gets broken, Dane ends up killing Proctor, but Circe ends up getting injured. Dane feels guilty about the whole thing and travels around the multiverse with Circe while she heals. Eventually, she feels well enough to return to the modern day main continuity with Dane, but then, after Dane is sent back, appears to change her mind. So yeah, I guess we'll see what the MCU decides to do with that horrific mess of a comic story. Number 5. Stone Heart. He has a literal stone heart. I'm not making this one up. During the series Captain Britain and MI-13, while returning from a mission where Black Knight went to retrieve the Ebony Blade from Wakanda, it is revealed that his heart is actually made of stone. Also, the Ebony Blade certainly gets lost and moved around a lot later in the comics. It will be interesting to see if Kit Harington's Black Knight is maybe able to hold on to it a little more tightly than his comic book counterpart. Anyways, his squire or steward at the time, Feza, is a doctor whose life he saved, and she berates him for not letting her even speak to Storm during their visit, and for keeping things from her, including the fact that he has a stone heart. She alludes to it as a curse, but the Black Knight claims it was a gift from his ex, Circe. Ugh, is that really how hearts work? Like, do you feel less if your heart is made of stone? Or do you just die? My money's on dying. Number 4. He went crazy. More recently in the comics, Black Knight was actually driven mad by exposure to the blade. It was later revealed to him by historian Rebecca Stevens that the blade has driven everyone that has ever wielded it mad. Based on our understanding so far of the blade, I'm not quite sure how true that is, and apparently Dane was also skeptical. He dismissed Rebecca's claims, despite the fact that she shared the information along with an offer to help him. Black Knight didn't want to hear it though, probably because he was crazy. Number 3. Blood Wraith. Throughout his time in the comics, Black Knight acquires squires and stewards who aid him on quests, very medieval times like. One such squire was Sean Dolan. However, during the Black Knight's time serving with the Avengers and assisting them while he was away from his squire, Sean got a hold of the Ebony Blade. Why was it unsupervised? I don't know. The Ebony Blade made him go completely evil and nuts when it harvested the souls of deceased Sloranians, turning Sean into Blood Wraith. Not even the Avengers could stop him. The best Scarlet Witch could do was strengthen Sean's bond to the blade, trapping him in Slorania. Okay, so maybe Rebecca was onto something. Number 2. Proctor. Ever imagine what would happen if Dane didn't fight so hard against the curse of the Ebony Blade? Well, imagine not, because Proctor is here. Why his name is so different from Dane's, we'll never know. But what we will get to know is what reality would be like if Dane just gave in to all the crazy that the Ebony Blade gives off. Proctor has his own Ebony Blade, and of course it is also very cursed, but this alternate version of the Black Knight just decided to give into it. Fighting does take a lot of work after all. The result was he went completely cuckoo crazy and evil. After being scorned by Circe, he killed her and went on a plot to kill all other alternate versions of her across the multiverse. This is where the Gan-Yozen comes in and everything gets really confusing, but we already explained that, so you get the idea. Number 1. The Curse. Back to the curse of the Ebony Blade that I touched on earlier. After Dane returned back to the present after the death of Eobar in the past, you with me? He discovered that the blade had become more powerful, but also more cursed. In order to cure the blade of the blood curse that it had come down with, he was forced to expel Percy's spirit from it, setting it free. Which ultimately sounds like a good move, because trapping a spirit in a sword, even if you're Merlin and it's like for a good cause, still kinda seems like a terrible thing to do to someone. After Percy's spirit was free from the sword, it was cured, until the Submariner Namor got his hands on it and used it to kill his literal monster of a wife at the time. Thanks for that, Namor. The curse then returned and double intensified, corrupting its user Dane. And if you haven't guessed it by this point, the curse doesn't seem to like give up or stay cured, so yeah. Poor Dane. Number 8. Ol' Uncle Nazi. Yitz Perlman was a close family friend and rabbi who had fled Germany with Spectre's family. Oh yeah, Mark is also Jewish. But it is later revealed in a flashback in the comics that Yitz Perlman, who has been a family friend of the Spectre since Elias, Mark's father, was just a kid, is actually not who he appears to be. Mark ends up in an area of the synagogue he is not meant to be in and falls down through a trap door leading into the basement. Further into the basement. He was meant to meet Yitz, who He fondly refers to his Uncle Yitz later in the evening. Yitz is also down in this basement in the dark, and upon Mark stumbling in, decides to reveal his true identity. He lights a match to reveal a bloody corpse hanging from the ceiling and offers Mark the prompt: a rabbi, a Nazi, and a serial killer walk into a bar. Yitz Perlman was actually the adopted identity that allowed Ernst, the man's real name, to escape Germany as Hitler's reign was coming to an end, and avoid prosecution as a Nazi. And as he suggests, he is also a serial killer. This revelation would scar Mark for the rest of his life, and leads into our next scary fact. Number 7. Multiple personalities. The traumatic revelation of finding out that his Uncle Yitz was actually a Nazi and serial killer ended up traumatizing Mark to the point that he developed a dissociative personality disorder. Which, I mean, is fair. If I found out that my uncle was a Nazi and a serial killer, I probably would want to take a break from being myself too. For those who don't know, dissociative personality disorder, also sometimes referred to as dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, is a condition where the afflicted alternates between at least 2 different personality states. The condition is also usually accompanied by blackouts and gaps in one's memory, meaning you can adopt another personality and go about your life in that separate identity or state, and then potentially forget what you were doing or have done. Pretty spooky stuff. And Mark doesn't just have 2 alternate personalities, no, he is a revolving door of 10 personalities, including Jake Lockley, cab driver, and Stephen Grant, millionaire. The fact that he is also capable of transitioning between them so quickly also makes it hard for him to settle down in life. Number 6. He has a kid. While admittedly having children isn't very scary, having a child while also suffering severely from dissociative identity disorder can be. I also think the premise of having a child and being fully responsible for a life is objectively terrifying, but that's just me. Remember Marlene from the Egyptian expedition gone wrong that strengthened his bond to Khonshu? Her and Mark have an on and off again romance in the comics. Kind of to be expected, considering their shared trauma. While the two have never quite been able to make it stick due to the fact that Mark's crime-fighting persona Moon Knight means putting Marlene constantly in danger, and the fact that he is constantly jumping from one of his personalities to the next, there is a time when they actually manage to settle down for a while. During this time, the two conceived a child, and Marlene gave birth to a daughter who is named Diatrice in the comics. Diatrice Alron, she took her mother's last name. The really odd and scary thing is that she's not really fully Mark's daughter. At the time that they settled down, Mark was living as his personality Jake Lockley, and it was because he settled into this personality for such a lengthy period that he and Marlene were even able to make the relationship work. So is Diatrice really even Mark's daughter? I don't know. Sounds like she's more Jake's daughter, I guess. Number 5. Khonshu. You might not think the Egyptian god of the moon Khonshu is a particularly frightening figure, especially since Khonshu is the one granting Mark his powers. But is he? Later in the comics, it is revealed that Khonshu seeks to drive Mark insane so that he can use his body as a vessel to enter the realm of the living. While this ends up being untrue, what is implied instead is even more terrifying. It is implied that Khonshu is simply an illusion that was created to help cure Mark. Ultimately, he recognizes that in order to gain control of himself and his personalities, he must accept them. In doing so, he gains control again and regains his sanity. One of those, ooh, it was all a dream type scenarios. Number 4. Morpheus. No, not that Morpheus. We are instead talking about one of Moon Knight's villains, Robert Markham. To really understand the darker side of this character, it's good to get into the mind of those he fights and also the way Mark grapples with his demons. Not just his internal demons either. Robert Markham was suffering from a rare viral disease and sought help. From there he became a patient of Peter Alroon Jr., brother of Marlene Alroon and son of the original Peter Alroon. Sorry if I'm saying this last name really wrong. My apologies. The experimental drug that Peter Jr. prescribes leads to Robert being unable to sleep and developing psionic abilities. Oh, and he also becomes a boogeyman monster looking type with like claw hands. It's creepy. He ends up being thwarted by Moon Knight the first time, but returns to his villainous ways after mutating even further, allowing himself to link his mind with Peter Jr.'s and use it to project nightmares into other people's minds. Hence his name Morpheus, which is actually adopted from Greek mythology, where Morpheus is known as the god of dreams. Not from the Matrix, unfortunately, in case you thought that was where I was going. But oddly enough, the same source that the writers for the Matrix probably were inspired by for their character of the same name. Number 3. Addiction. Like most heroes, he has also suffered from an addiction. His is one that is actually also a huge global issue in the real world currently, an addiction to painkillers. This happened as a result of a battle between him and Bush Bushman that left him crippled with 2 broken knees. Obviously needing the medication while healing, he ended up developing an addiction to them. Like Mark, doesn't have enough issues to worry about. He sees things, has illusions, was friends with a Nazi, and wrestles with multiple personalities, and fights crime on top of that. And then he also has to wrestle with an addiction? Oh, talk about a rough go. Number 2, his brother is a serial killer. Everywhere you look with Moon Knight, there are just serial killers everywhere, and you definitely don't have to look far for this one. Randall Spector is Mark Spector's brother, who after betraying him by killing his girlfriend and getting blown up by Mark with a grenade, became a serial killer of nurses. Oddly specific. He currently goes by the name Shadow Knight, and his costume and look is also quite terrifying as well. Definitely not someone you'd want to meet in a dark alley. He is part of the cult of Khonshu and was granted superhuman strength and durability by Princess Nephthys, who was also once his lover. Number 1, brutality. Bushman has obviously been one of Mark's greatest foes throughout the comics, and as a result of such, their fights have been legendary. These fights have also gone to show just how different Mark Spector really is from DC's Batman. Batman can be brutal too, sure, but there's Batman level brutal, and then there's Moon Knight's level of brutal. For an example of just how violent Moon Knight can be, and as an example of how he really sees himself as the one doling out justice, I point you to Moon Knight Volume 5, Issue 2. This is also the fight where Moon Knight shatters both his knees, but even while down, he keeps on fighting, and gruesomely too. He manages to cut off Bushman's face using the blade on his crescent moon dart. I don't think I've ever seen Batman quite do that. Number 5, Thena. With Angelina Jolie slated to play Thena in the upcoming film, you may be wanting to know more about her character. Who is Thena? As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the Eternals characters were inspired by Greek and Roman mythology, and Thena is no different. She takes inspiration from Zeus's daughter Athena. In fact, her father Zuras even changed her name from Azura to Thena to resemble the character from Greek mythology. She is a strong character who has also been represented in the comics as a caring mother and noble Eternal, who tries to protect the world against Celestials. Her abilities, like most Eternals, are off the charts and include telekinesis, cosmic matter manipulation, flight, super strength, and durability, concussive blasts, healing, and of course, immortality. And that's not even all of them. Number 4, indestructible. Their immortality knows almost no bounds. I mean, they can die, but to kill an Eternal is like next level challenging. It's so hard you'd probably just give up. In order to destroy an Eternal, you don't just need to kill them. You don't just need to vaporize them. Icarus actually came back from that one. You need to full on eliminate them. The thing about Eternals is they have complete control over their molecular makeup, and are also made up of cosmic energy. So when I say that you would need to eliminate them, what I mean is you would need to scatter them across the galaxy, possibly like galaxies, to fully get rid of them. What happens if you don't end up killing them? They'll just come back. They'll regen and pop right back up. And if you try to kill an Eternal and you fail, you're probably gonna get killed next. And most other types of humans, mutants, heroes can actually die in comics. Well, sort of. I mean, it's still comics, so is every character not kind of immortal? Somewhat? Unless their comics really start to tank. Number 3, they were once human. At least, they thought they were. Sprite is possibly the youngest Eternal in terms of appearance. That is to say, he is a really ancient immortal who is trapped inside the body of a child. Driven to madness by this, he seeks revenge on his fellow Eternals for treating him like a child for so many years, and causes their memories to be altered so that they believe they are humans. His hope was that once they realized who they really were, after working so hard to build their human life, that they would feel intense pain and regret when it came to giving up their human lives and dealing with their true identities, and that the pain they felt would hopefully come somewhat close to what Sprite had felt all these years. Dang, Sprite. That's dark. Number 2, Cersei. Cersei is kind of a big deal in comics because she has also fought alongside the Avengers, stepping in to replace the Forgotten One and becoming a core member through to some of the 90s. She even flirted with Captain America. She also took a break from the heroics in the aftermath of Sprite's trick on all of the Eternals, preferring to continue out her human life as a socialite instead of going back to heroics. Her powers reflect that of Thena's in many ways, also including molecular manipulation and teleportation, but where she really shines is with her ability to produce illusions, even though she's not quite on Sprite's level. She is slated to be played by Gemma Chan. Gemma Chan previously played the role of Minerva in MCU's Captain Marvel film. Number 1, They all died. I know, I said earlier that they were immortal. However, in Avengers Volume 8, things got really dark for the Eternals. We are led to believe they all met their ends fighting one another or just killing themselves. So I guess an efficient way to kill an Eternal is with an Eternal. This happened after the Dark Celestials were revealed to be on their way to Earth. Apparently the Eternals found out that their true purpose was to actually harvest humankind. After being led to believe they were there to protect the humans on Earth and working to do so for thousands of years, this revelation drove them all insane, and they died either killing themselves or one another as a result of their madness. Well, we'll have to wait and see if the MCU decides to incorporate this dark storyline or not. Number 10. His wife died. It wasn't just the fact that she died, it was sort of the way in which she died. Mr. Sinister was once Nathaniel Essex in the 1800s, living as an academic, a doctor, and a student of Darwinism, obsessed with the next step in human evolution. His wife, Rebecca, found out about his experiments on humans in this regard and was shocked. This caused her to go into early labor as she was very pregnant at the time. As a result, the baby was stillborn. She managed to free Dr. Essex's experiments, but unfortunately died as a result of the stress of the whole situation. With her last dying breath, she gave Nathaniel the name he would later take up. You see, he had been about to ally himself with Apocalypse at the time, but Jean Grey warned him of the destruction that would befall the planet if he did, and instead he decided to return to his wife and dedicate himself to his family. All too late, unfortunately. His wife swore she could not forgive him before passing away, calling him utterly and contemptibly sinister. As a result, he would join up with Apocalypse and be transformed, claiming the new name Mr. Sinister. I mean, he is still a doctor, so sort of Dr. Sinister. Number 9. Stole a Celestial's powers. At one point, Mr. Sinister ran into Tiamat, who was sleeping, and managed to siphon off some of the Celestial's powers. He used the powers to create an entire city filled with sinister clones, inspired by Victorian London in appearance. As frightening as one Mr. Sinister is, you can imagine how terrifying an entire city comprised of his clones would be. Fortunately, the city was destroyed by the Phoenix Five. Number 8. Manipulated Cyclops. Most people are familiar with Mr. Sinister's involvement in the creation of Cable, but for those who aren't, allow me to explain. Mr. Sinister has an unhealthy obsession with Cyclops, believing him to be the perfect specimen. Of course, Sinister has an unhealthy obsession with a lot of things, but his involvement with Scott as a result of his obsession and the Summers line is kind of on a whole other level. Sinister cloned Jean Grey, creating Madeline Pryor, knowing that Scott would end up with Madeline Pryor and that the two of them would have children. And he was right, and Madeline gave birth to a baby named Nathan. Nathan then grew up and ended up becoming Cable. Beyond even just the manipulation of who Cyclops would mate with though, it has also been revealed that Mr. Sinister has been messing with Cyclops' life since he was a child. Sinister experimented on Cyclops when he was just a kid for basically an entire year. He is also the man responsible for the separation of Alex and Scott when their parents died in a plane accident. Number 7. Created the Marauders. Well, really, even more shockingly, Gambit kind of created the Marauders, but he did it all for Mr. Sinister. Remember when it was revealed that Gambit had a dark secret and everyone thought it was going to be that he was the Witness and the person who ended up betraying the X-Men? Well, it wasn't that. The secret was that he had worked for Mr. Sinister as a retroactive favor after Mr. Sinister helped him to gain control over his powers by removing a part of his brain. Ugh. Also, now Mr. Sinister has that part of his brain, so yeah. Mr. Sinister had Gambit assemble the Marauders and use them to attack the Morlocks, who he believed were abominations when it came to his pursuit of genetic advancement, and had them hunt down and steal baby Nathan from Madeline Pryor. All sorts of evil stuff. Number 6. Influence the High Evolutionary. In the 1920s, Nathaniel Essex's research would live on to inspire another villain in the making, obsessed with genetics, Herbert Wyndham. Wyndham, fascinated by Essex's research, was inspired to do his own testing, though fortunately not on humans, but still on rats. Still, his work would later be considered to be controversial enough to see him expelled from Oxford University. Wyndham would later go on to become the High Evolutionary. The Evolutionary played a role in the Maximoff twins' troubled past, and helped to transform Jessica Drew into Spider-Woman, and later would also work alongside Mr. Sinister, helping to depower all of mutant kind. Mr. Sinister has a ton of evil students, actually, fun fact. including Dark Beast. Number 5, release the Legacy virus. Okay, so he didn't do it on purpose, but still, Mr. Sinister was the one responsible for releasing the Legacy virus. Strife had created the virus and passed on a canister containing it to Mr. Sinister, claiming that the canister actually contained thousands of years worth of genetic material in regards to the Summers bloodline. Foolishly, Mr. Sinister had the canister opened, only to find it was empty and accidentally released the Legacy virus into the world, so named because it was Strife's legacy gift to the world after his death. Quite the gift. Mr. Sinister then frantically worked to cure it, so it wouldn't kill all of mutant kind. However, he was beaten to the discovery of a cure by Moira McTaggart, who actually was dying as she figured it out, passing the information along to Professor X through his telepathy. Number 4, Miss Sinister. One of the creepiest things about Mr. Sinister is he is nearly immortal due to his obsession with genetics and cloning. He even built a failsafe in regards to his preservation in the event of his demise. He injected one of his test subjects, Claudine Renko, with a virus that upon his death would activate. This ended up transforming her into the perfect female genetic clone of Mr. Sinister. As such, she also became obsessed with manipulating the X-Men and causing harm to innocent life through experimentation. After being stabbed by Dakan for messing with him, she seeks out and traps X-23 in an attempt to transfer her consciousness into Laura's body and escape the overwhelming consciousness of Mr. Sinister, which has been plaguing her mind. Her plot ended up being foiled by Mr. Sinister himself, who invaded X-23's mind and forced her to attack Miss Sinister. X-23 escaped along with Gambit, who was accompanying her at the time, and a girl named Alice, a clone who had actually led them to Miss Sinister. However, Miss Sinister managed to just barely survive this encounter, and so did Mr. Sinister, who had taken possession of the 5th clone of Alice, transferring his consciousness into her. So now we have a creepy young girl version of Mr. Sinister in this story. Ugh. Number 3, Essex House. An interesting and disturbing Easter egg can be found in Deadpool 2 that is a reference to Mr. Sinister. Did you manage to spot it? The orphanage that Russell and Domino were raised in was called the Essex House of Mutant Rehabilitation. While I don't think Nathaniel Essex would think of abusing mutants for religious reasons, like the headmaster did, Mr. Sinister would definitely have tortured the children there in regards to experimentation and testing. The orphanage is stated as being owned by the Essex Corporation, which has also been referred to in other X-Men films. A corporation that was obsessed with collecting genetic mutant material. How interesting. Mr. Sinister was even rumored to have been the big bad in the film Logan. However, he never appeared there. Guess we'll have to wait and see if he appears in the MCU's version of X-Men? Totally would have made sense that he was behind X-23's cloning and everything, but whatever. Number 2, experimented on his son. Nathaniel's son died of a natural malady that he was born with. He was malformed and apparently was too weak to live. We later find out that after his son's death, he dug him back up and utilized his recently deceased son's corpse in a series of experiments. The goal of his work was noble, to help prevent the condition his son died from in others, but he still managed to shock his wife to death with this. Beyond that, it's implied that Nathaniel may have experimented on his son while he was alive, trying to cure or fix him of his natural ailment, which, like, sure, he's just trying to be a doctor, but also, like, WTF? That's kind of messed up. Number 1, worked as a scientist at Auschwitz. Mr. Sinister was actually allied with the Nazis during World War II, unsurprisingly. Shockingly though, he worked as a scientist at Auschwitz, where he was given the right to take anyone from the concentration camp that he so chose. He could even save people who were just about to enter the gas chamber. I use the term save, of course, lightly. What he was really doing was taking people to experiment on, in particular searching for mutants among those trapped in the camp. He was given the nickname Nosferatu, as it was rumored he would give you sweets in exchange for a blood sample. Even German soldiers were afraid of this Mr. Sinister. Number 10, Thanos. So if you're a Marvel fan, you may be aware of all the countless retcons that have existed, but you also might not even be aware of all of them depending on where you jumped into the comics. Retcons seem to happen in the Marvel universe daily. One of my least favorite retcons being that Scarlet Witch is no longer a mutant or Magneto's daughter. To that I say #NotMyWanda. One such retcon that could have been very interesting should the Marvel Cinematic Universe decided to go there involves Thanos. If you are an MCU fan, you know Thanos is a Titan from, well, Titan. But did you know in the comics that he is actually an Eternal? That is right. The comics introduced a retcon after the Eternals became a well-known race that welcomed all Titanians under the Eternal umbrella, which makes Thanos currently what is referred to as a Titan Eternal in comic book canon. But we'll have to wait to see if some flashbacks allow him to be retconned in the MCU when the Eternals take to the silver screen. 9. Subrace. Within the race of the Eternals or group of the Eternals, there are sub-races or subgroups. It seems seems that the MCU Eternals will primarily involve and explore the characters that are part of the Earth Eternals, but it is possible that we may get to explore Titan Eternals, Uranus Eternals, and perhaps even other Eternals, as there have been appearances in the comics of both the Kree and Skull Eternal as well. So who knows what bundle of Eternals we could potentially end up with in the future. All of these races / groups obviously stand to clarify where the Eternals are from, but beyond that there are also like sub races or groups of Eternals, which continue to specify certain regions of a planet those Eternals are from. So yeah, we could get like pretty next level specific with these characters' origins and descriptions if we wanted to. Number 8. Eternals Assemble. While the Avengers have assembled many times throughout comic book history, and by joining together have accomplished many heroic feats, they don't have anything on the Eternals. When the Eternals assemble, they actually have the ability to merge and become the Unimind, a being comprised of at least several Eternals combining all of their abilities, powers, and intelligence. Once they merge together, they transform into light and pure energy, creating the unique Unimind. Kind of like Steven Universe's gems when they merge. Pretty neat and useful, really. Number 7. Who is Alars? So although Thanos is now dead, and many people have speculated that he will not actually get to be classified as an Eternal in the MCU, there is evidence in the film Avengers Infinity War that could support his indoctrination into the world of the Eternals. When Thanos meets Red Skull in his pursuance of the Soul Stone, Red Skull greets him as Thanos, son of Alars. Who is Thanos' father? Mentor. So who is Alars? Alars actually is Mentor, or rather Alars is his eternal name while Mentor is his Titan name. The fact that the MCU decided to refer to Mentor with his eternal name means that Thanos is more closely connected to the Eternals than we might have thought, and that we could potentially get to see Alars, aka Mentor, join the Eternals ranks in the film, which would be pretty sweet. Number 6. Celestials. The Eternals are often perceived as being ancient, immortal, and powerful beings in the comics, which might make you think that they are too OP for the cinematic world and could ruin it. To that I say, hold your horses, there are beings that are far more powerful than them in the comics and in the MCU. Namely, the Celestials. You may have seen them pop up every now and then, but who or what are they? And what do they have to do with the Eternals? Well, they are some of the closest entities to gods and life creators that the Marvel Universe has, which I guess makes the Eternals sort of like demigods, because they are the ones credited with the creation of the Eternals, and in fact superhuman beings on Earth, and even are credited with the creation of the X gene that gives us mutants. They are older than the Asgardians and have been shown to be literally untouchable by the Eternals in the comics. Now that's some real OP stuff. Number 10. Zombie. Yep, Sabretooth was also part of the Marvel Zombieverse. Though his part was small, he looked equally terrifying in his role. Sabretooth was one of the supervillain zombies who shows up to challenge the few power cosmic zombies over the recently slain body of Galactus. Unfortunately, all we get to see is Sabretooth looking ferocious in a panel, and we know that he likely met his end fighting Wolverine, but we don't even get to see his death. Sadly, it appears to happen off panel. Nah, wanted to see that. Oh well, we gotta see him look scary. So, that's a scary fact. Number 9. Killed his brother. Growing up when Sabretooth's abilities manifested, he was just a kid. It was his brother's birthday and his brother refused to share a slice of pie with him. The two children squabbled, as children are apt to do, and eventually the squabble turned into a fight. He ended up killing his brother, biting open his throat with his teeth as a result of his mutation manifesting. Kinda made him, you know, animalistic and violent. When his mom found the two boys, the color drained from her face, but young Victor assured her that they had only just been playing. Aw, playing to the death though, so not aw. Ugh, scary. I'll just say scary a bunch of times, then that'll make these facts scary, right? Number 8. Victim of child abuse. Growing up, Sabretooth's father abhorred him for being what he called a beast. A huge part of this was of course a result of Victor, killing his brother. As a result, his father would routinely torture him because of this, keeping him chained up and even pulling his fangs, claiming that he was attempting to save his son from his own uncontrollable animal instincts. Because young Victor boasted of a healing factor, his fangs would always grow back, and his father would therefore always keep pulling them. Ugh. Oh, sounds terrible. He tried to persuade his mother to release him from his chained prison in their cellar basement, but she refused, terrified of both her husband and of what her son had become. Number 7. Killed his father. Unsurprisingly, Victor ended up escaping the basement eventually, and he managed this by chewing off his own hand. All those Saw memories coming back to me. After he had successfully broken the chain that was holding on to his other one. He then confronted his mother and father in the house with the pliers that had been used to pull his own teeth. In revenge, he killed his father and then rewarded himself with a slice of pie, running off into the night with his disembodied hand clutched in his other. Every time someone cuts off a hand or a leg or a foot or something, I'm always like, I feel like Saw started a lot of this. I don't know if that's true though. Probably someone else that inspired Saw. Number 6. Brutally killed Wolverine's lover. Sabretooth and Wolverine have seemingly always been villains, but those who don't know their history might be wondering exactly why this is. The feud can be linked back to Victor's family. Wolverine was once in love with Victor's sister, Clara, which soured their relationship somewhat. Add in the fact that Wolverine just generally doesn't really like or trust Sabretooth, and you've got some reason why the two tangle up so much. But Sabretooth also started hunting Wolverine after his little brother was killed by Wolverine, his little brother Saul. Victor used to torture Saul every day on his birthday, and when he found out that Logan had taken that from him, he decided to transfer the tradition to him, treating Logan like his little brother and causing him grief every birthday instead. Like a lot of grief, like a lot. The first official birthday surprise that Logan received from Victor was revealed in the X-Men Origins Sabretooth story. Sabretooth raped and killed Silver Fox, Wolverine's lover at the time, and much later in Origins we also find out that beyond being a whole plot, this was part of the ongoing feud between the two mutants. Sabretooth would continue to show up on Wolverine's birthday every year just to beat him up. True story. Number 5. Clones. What's more scary than one Sabretooth? Several of them, of course. During Wolverine Volume 3, Issue 55, it had appeared that Wolverine had killed Sabretooth. Killed him with a blade that would mean that he couldn't regenerate anymore, basically cancelled out his powers. But later on it was established that this actually wasn't Sabretooth at all, but was actually a clone of Victor Creed. Turned out that Romulus, who had created the clone, had not just created one, but had created multiple. Yikes! Later on, Sabretooth would make his triumphant return to the comics and reveal he'd just been biding his time, waiting in the shadows for the opportune time to create more havoc in Wolverine's life. Oh no. But oh, it's true, it's true. You think you kill a guy, turns out you don't, because that's comics. Number 4. His obsession with Wolverine. So, Sabretooth's obsession with Wolverine has now evolved to be about more than just the past that they share. As the comics go on, it kind of gets more and more intense actually. Sabretooth is straight up stalker material when it comes to just how much he longs to be Wolverine's number 1 arch nemesis. He's like, you can't have any other arch nemesis, it can only be me. Not only does he find him every year on his birthday and try to kill him, but he also kills those that go after Wolverine to protect what he has labeled as his. Only he can kill Wolverine, I guess. Wolverine is his to torment and no one else's. Aw, how sweet. Victor Creed made sure this was known in issue 10 of the Wolverine series out of 1988. He painfully dispatched a pair of thugs who would threaten Wolverine's life on his birthday, wrapping them up like a birthday present and leaving them with an impromptu birthday card that read, "Nobody kills you but me, especially today." Possessive much? Oh my gosh. Also, I don't know, was that the best present that Wolverine's gotten from Victor Creed? It might have been the best one because I feel like it wasn't like a dead lover or something at least. Number 3. He enjoys killing. One of the scariest things about Sabretooth as a villain is that he thoroughly enjoys his kills, especially the women. It's really twisted. In the last few years of comics, we've seen more of a transition in his character. After the events of Axis, he was one of the few that actually stayed flipped for a while. For 3 years, he worked hard at redeeming himself and becoming a hero. Now he's back to his villainous ways, but it was astonishing to me that this was even possible given just how many people Victor has murdered and how much he thoroughly seems to relish killing. He's often depicted after a kill as being covered in blood and looking like he's having the time of his life. He is the animal instinct, unbidden, unashamed, and unchained incarnate. Number 2. The devil set him loose. So you might now be wondering, but if Sabretooth was good for so long and was on a path of redemption, why did he change? Good question. He did enjoy killing, but he had grown past that in the aftermath of Axis and was ready to try to make amends. During the end of 2017's Weapon X series, however, we find out just how this all shook out and how things sort of got switched back. He had taken over leadership of the Weapon X crew, turning them into sort of anti-heroes. This was after Creed had stepped into Logan's shoes for a while following his apparent death, becoming an an Avenger and an X-Man for a time. During his time with Weapon X, he ended up sacrificing himself to bring back his and Mystique's son, Graydon Creed, who had died from hell. But the devil was displeased by this, knowing that Sabretooth would feel justified in what he had done and therefore torturing him in hell would just simply not be as fun. So the devil sent him back to the land of the living, but made one big evil change. He freed Victor of any semblance of morality that he had built, turning him back into a vicious and savage monster. Ooh, you know as well if the devil's like, this is a great idea, that's a scary thing that's happening. If the devil stands by it, it's probably gonna be scary. Number 1. Trapped eternally in Krakoa. During the first meeting of the Quiet Council of Krakoa in House of X, one of the first matters brought up was the judgment of Sabretooth. The Quiet Council was seeking to establish what their laws should be while also deciding what to do with Victor. In the end, they determined that they would abide by 3 major laws: make more mutants, murder no man, human, and to respect the sacred land of Krakoa. As Victor had broken the new laws, Xavier offered him 2 choices: a chance to redeem himself or the option of being made an example of. Victor remained defiant and stubborn in regards to being judged and cursed those of the Quiet Council, swearing that he would kill them all. For this, they decided they had no option but to punish him. His punishment was to remain deep inside Krakoa in a conscious stasis for forever, or until the Quiet Council felt inspired to give him another chance. This to me is just one of the most terrifying things to have happened to Sabretooth. He's just like snug, deep inside the land of Krakoa, unable to move but still aware, still able to think, alive but unable to do anything with his life. It creeps me out. And who knows when, if ever, we will get to see Sabretooth return again. Though I mean it's comics, so we probably will, but maybe not for a while. Also, that's a creepy way to leave someone. Number 10. Duplicates. When we're talking about duplicates when it comes to Mastermind, we're talking about a few things. Firstly, this is a constant fight tactic of Jason's. He often uses his illusion abilities to create duplicates of himself to trick and confuse his opponents. Imagine thousands of masterminds. That's certainly scarier than one. But there are also just multiple masterminds. What I mean is, there are multiple people who have taken up that evil mantle. There is the AI enemy of Captain Britain known as Mastermind, who can also project holograms and create illusions, but more notably there are Jason Wingard, the original Mastermind's confirmed daughters, Martinique, who goes by Mastermind as well, and Reagan, who goes by Lady Mastermind. Other than the power of numbers, another frightful thing about Jason's daughters are that they are both considered to be more powerful actually than him, or than he was. Cause he dead. Number 9. Leader of the Hellfire Club. Not in the comics, of course, unfortunately. Mastermind had trouble even getting into the Hellfire Club in truth in the comics, but more on that later. However, did you know that there was a popular British TV show in the 1960s called The Avengers? The show was different from the comics as it actually predated Marvel's Avengers team, which legally had to be called Avengers, as the Avengers was already in use by the British television series. The actor that our Jason Wingard was inspired by was actually Peter Wingard. Peter played the leader of the Hellfire Club in the series, but his most famous role was Detective Jason King from Department S and a self-titled series. Imagine if Mastermind had been the leader of the Hellfire Club in the comics too. I feel like he might have been worse than Sebastian Shaw even. There was even a character in the show named Emma who danced at the Hellfire Club, though she was a spy named Emma Peel, not a telepath named Emma Frost. Also, did you know Hellfire Club is a term for just a general sort of gentlemen's clubs? I didn't know that, but I learned that today. Anytime someone would have said Hellfire Club, I'd be like, you mean like in Marvel? But no, Marvel does not own that term. There you go. Number 8. Enjoys the suffering of others. I mean, this isn't surprising to me, but it sure is terrifying how much Jason enjoys the torture and humiliation of other people. Wingard helped the Brotherhood and Magneto to take control of the country Santo Marco by creating a massive illusionary army, making the people of the nation believe they had no option but to surrender. When he sees that Magneto believes in harsh punishments, locking anyone who attempts to rebel in the dungeon, Mastermind exclaims how much he delights in the way Magneto does things. So, not a villain you'd want to be ensnared by then. Anyone who sides with old school Magneto on the appropriate severity of punishment is not a person you want to run into. Although I guess he could only torture you with illusions, so it's not that bad. He'd just make you think you're in the dungeon. Number 7. Wouldn't take no for an answer. So to be fair, I find this pursuit more gross than scary. Especially because it was the 60s, and this was back when we were first introduced to Wingard in regards to continuity. He made his first appearance in Uncanny X-Men issue 4, which is incidentally the first issue in which he started heavily hitting on Scarlet Witch, and in a very rude rude and demeaning fashion. Like, I know it was the 1960s, but even for the era and for comics, it was really rude. I've read some 1960s comics, and this is like going beyond that. And I believe it was definitely intended to come across that way. Scarlet Witch spurned his advances, but that didn't stop the Mastermind from continuing in his attempts to woo her. In issue 7, he offered the world to her, the illusionary world anyways. Anything that her heart desired, a life of luxury, whatever she wanted via his illusion powers. She once again refused his advances, and he once again refused to take no for an answer and started insulting Magneto and proceeded to assault Scarlet Witch. Yikes! Thankfully, Magneto came in and was just like, I want you to be blindly loyal to me, or blindly obedient, and so he put a stop to that. But also, he's just coming in being crazy. Everyone be blindly obedient to me. I'm Magneto. This is original X-Men. Number 6. Turn to Stone. At one point, the Stranger was invited to join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants in a kind of random turn of events. To impress him, I guess, everyone on the team decided to show off their powers. Toad was leaping, Magneto was meddling things, and Mastermind was illusioning. The Stranger decided to respond by also doing a power flex, enraged by their display, for some reason, I guess because they were kind of torturing him. Unfortunately, Mastermind got the brunt of this rage and was turned to stone by the Stranger. I guess Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch still didn't like Mastermind very much at this point because both powerful mutants kind of just let this happen. Quicksilver just actually remarks on it. He's like, oh no, he's stoned now. Like, you could have stopped that. You're really fast, Quicksilver. But don't worry, Professor Xavier was able to confirm that Wingard was in fact a stone statue, but was also still alive, using his knowledge, his abilities, and a stethoscope, because comics. And Jason would eventually return to his old self. This, by the way, is when he went on a little hiatus from the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Which is fair. I feel like if you get turned to stone, it's a good time to maybe take a break from that. Number 5. Can make terrifying illusions. Jason's illusion creating powers allow him to create anything he wishes in illusion form. Though these hallucinations are not physical, they are so mentally believable that it would be hard for a normal human to dismiss them. It's even hard sometimes for superheroes to dismiss these. Not only does the illusion visually appear convincing, but he can also alter your sense of taste, smell, and touch as well when it comes to his illusions. When the Brotherhood of Evil ended up in a fight with the Blob and his team of carnies, Wingard used his powers to make them believe that their hammers were snakes, and that volcanoes were just erupting all around them, with lava blasting out, setting fire to them and the area. The illusion succeeded in terrifying his opponents, but Mastermind became startled when he was flanked by more carnies. The main weakness of Mastermind's illusions are that if he loses focus, they kinda just vanish. Though Scarlet Witch did imply that he couldn't put up illusions in a large enough area to startle everyone that was attacking them, when he definitely has done that before. Like in that thing with Santa Marco, he actually created like a country's wide of illusions, so I don't understand. So I really feel like Jason actually shouldn't have lost this one, but hey. Comics. Number 4. Manipulated a child. One of the seemingly kind but still evil tasks that he completed as a member in the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants was rewriting a very young Lorna Dane's memory. Using his powers, he altered her memory so that she would believe her parents died in a freak accident. Later, Longshot tried to make her believe that Magneto was actually the cause of the accident when a grown-up Laura went searching for answers. But in reality, it turned out that little Lorna was actually the cause of the plane crash that killed her parents. Her mother fighting with who she thought had been her biological father caused little Lorna to get stressed, and that led to Lorna's magnetic mutant abilities activating, which caused her to accidentally tear the plane apart. In truth, she was actually Magneto's biological daughter, but he wasn't ready for her yet, so he used Jason's powers to make her forget this. While it seems like a kindness, this revelation would later almost cause Lorna to have a psychotic break. In altering her memory, Wingard caused her a great amount of future pain. Number 3. Enslaved Jean Grey. Sort of. Mastermind wanted to join the Hellfire Club's inner circle. To prove himself, he attempted to recruit Jean Grey as their Black Queen, using his skills to manipulate her, and he appeared to succeed. What he didn't know was that this wasn't exactly Jean Grey, but was in fact the Phoenix, whom he was dealing with, which honestly is more terrifying, even if he only managed to successfully bend the Phoenix to his will temporarily. However, she managed to break his hold on her, freeing Cyclops and helping the other X-Men whom the Hellfire Club held captive to escape, before turning her deadly gaze back to her original captor, Mastermind. Number 2. Driven insane! In fact, Jason's temporary enslavement and manipulation of the Phoenix would unleash the darkness within her, causing her to become Dark Phoenix. And in revenge for his attempt to manipulate him, she shared with him awareness of all the psionic impressions in the cosmos, which drove him insane because his mind couldn't handle it. As a result, Wingard was left in a catatonic state and was admitted to a mental institute. He would spend a few years there but would never be fully the same, haunted by the temporary full awareness of the cosmos that he had experienced and the loss of it. He both wanted it back, but it also drove him crazy, so it's like, whoa. Number 1. Created the Void. In the 2005 New Avengers series, we discovered that Mastermind was actually the one behind the creation of the Void. I know, what? It turns out that he was hired to tamper with Robert Reynolds' mind, making him scared to use his powers. Basically, he made Robert believe that if he did, the devil would basically attack Earth and everything would go crazy. Hence, Robert became that devil. His personality split and he became his biggest fear, the villain that was the Void, as well as being the Sentry. In the end, this is what drove him to erase his superhero persona from everyone's mind, including his own. In issue 9 of New Avengers, we found out this whole split that Robert suffered from, all his fear, was because of Mastermind. Shocking? Yeah, I know. I love how Mastermind is just more powerful after he died in comics. We just keep learning things about him that he did when he was alive. We're like, what? He did that? That's crazy.
Brings off in at number 10, what's in a name? We mentioned earlier in our intro that Jack is often referred to as merely werewolf, but there are a few other names that the character has too. Jack's birth name is actually Jacob Rusoff. The Rusoff family has a long line of ancestors impacted by lycanthropy, with the first dating back to 1795 when Gregory Rusoff was mutated into a werewolf by one that had been imprisoned by Dracula himself. More on that in a sec though. Jack's mother Laura had fled after her husband Gregor, a werewolf, had been killed with a silver bullet, and his family driven out of their home in Transylvania. Laura relocated, remarried with Gregor's younger brother Philip, and anglicized their last name. Now unfortunately, only more strife was headed their way. From the publication history side of things, fans were quick to point out that his name, Jack Russell, is a breed of dog. Co-creator Jerry Conway has stated that he can't remember how he came up with the name Jack Russell, leaving many historians to believe that he wasn't making a dog reference consciously. Plus, he never owned a dog or lived with one in his life, so. Up next, number 9, his ancestors. Let's jump back to Gregory Rusoff for this number. In 1795, Gregory was a regular dude with a wife named Louisa living in Transylvania. When Dracula returned to Transylvania, Gregory refused to acknowledge the vampire's authority, so Dracula, being a petty decided to show him by brutally killing Louisa. In his grief, Gregory ambushed and destroyed Dracula, but in the aftermath, he had been mutated by that werewolf Dracula had imprisoned, named Lydia. Gregory would take a second wife, and from there, it's a little hazy as to whether or not his descendants were affected by his lycanthropy genetically. Fast forward to 1930, a descendant of Gregory's, named Gregor, but not to be confused with Jack's father, might I add, obtained the Darkhold Scrolls, also known as the Book of Sin, which he bound into a book. Reading about lycanthropy and the scrolls under a full moon triggered the latent genes in his body, and he was transformed into a werewolf. He would go on to kill Jonathan Drew's wife and would be kept imprisoned by Drew and his partner Windham for decades before using the Darkhold to break free. And yes, the Windham of the High Evolutionary fame, in case you're wondering. Moving on to number 8, escaping Transylvania. Decades after that, another Gregor, Jack's father this time, married the former girlfriend of his brother Philip, a woman named Laura who would be Jack's mother. After giving birth to Jack and becoming pregnant with his sister Lisa, lightning struck the castle that they lived in during a full moon and Gregor transformed. He escaped confinement and attacked local villagers and was eventually killed by silver bullets. As we mentioned, Jack's family was forced to move out of Transylvania, including his grandmother, Maria, who was stoned and fled to live with gypsies and never actually met Jack until he was much older. Laura then married Philip, and Jack was 2 at the time of these events. Alright, and at number 7, tragedy strikes. 15 years later, Philip was blackmailed by a criminal organization called the Committee after they learned of Gregor's lycanthropy. Philip meant to pay them off, but got cold feet about it, and the Committee had Laura murdered on Jack's 18th birthday. I mean, the women in this story not getting a lot of help, although, you know, it was the 70s after all. Still, ugh. On her deathbed, she told Jack the truth about his real father and made him promise not to harm Philip before passing away. Jack would still blame Philip for a long time for the death of his mother. Now around this time, he would also get into a fight with a motorcycle gang, infecting them with lycanthropy, and eventually decided to hit the road and become a traveler while he struggled internally with the ancient family curse that caused him to turn into a beast. Moving on to number 6, the Comics Code Authority. Let's take a detour from fiction for a second and talk about something in the real world that massively affected not only Werewolf by Night, but the entire horror genre in comic books. Back in 1954, the Comics Code Authority came to be. It was a non-government regulation on comics that publishers had to follow. It was the result of multiple Senate hearings that questioned how harmful the content in comic books were to their young readers. It mainly axed out violence, horror, and anything that could be perceived as queer, gay, or lesbian content. Now, despite not being mandatory in order to sell comics, it was the de facto censorship for the medium in the US at the height of its influence, and advertisers and retailers looked to see the seal of approval on comics that they marketed or sold for reassurance. Whole companies who focused on genres that were typically censored fell apart, and many different storylines and characters were changed dramatically in the Silver Age to accommodate it. Looking at you, Batman. So what does this have to do with Werewolf by Night? Well, prior to that, one of Marvel's predecessors, Atlas Comics, had published Werewolf by Night in 1953 as a 5-page short story, and after the rules of the code were becoming more lax and werewolves were found as acceptable content again, Marvel hopped on that story and made it their own under the suggestion of Stan Lee. While Werewolf at Night has received praise and earned the adoration of many fans, many horror titles find it difficult to compete with the bigger superhero titles that publishers boast. And prior to the Comics Code, horror comics were all the rage. So one can't help but wonder what kind of success Jack Russell could have had if the censorship laws of the past had been different. Moving on to number 5, the Darkhold Obsession. Jack has killed. He is a werewolf after all. Now, after hitting the road, he would spend the next several years of his life transforming into a werewolf during the 3 nights of the full moon. Eventually, he was kidnapped by a couple named Nathan and Agatha Timley, who would tell him about the Darkhold, and Jack, in his werewolf form, killed them. Sneaking into his ancestor's castle, which Philip had sold, he stole the Darkhold and would eventually translate it, although it was destroyed, thus beginning Jack's quest to learn more about his past and the Darkhold. He teamed up with the sorceress Taboo and managed to find another copy of it, which luckily his ancestor Gregor had copied into a diary. But this was lost after battling Dracula in the Alps. What would follow were a series of adventures in which he would cross paths with other horror comic icons, the likes of Frankenstein's monster, the Jekyll and Hyde inspired Deprave, and Morbius the Living Vampire. Speaking of, moving on to number 4, Morbius the Living Vampire. So Jack has rubbed shoulders with another major horror icon in Marvel's roster, Morbius the Living Vampire. Not only have the two duked it out over the years, but Jack actually appeared as a supporting character in Morbius' solo series from 1993 to 1995. The two would actually work together when Morbius formed a new iteration of the Midnight Suns team, which also had Damien Hellstrom, Jennifer Kale, and Man-Thing as members during Marvel Zombies 4 in 2009. The group, inoculated by a zombie virus vaccine created by Morbius, would investigate a cruise ship attacked by zombie fishmen, unraveling a more complex plan that involved Dormammu. Coming in at number 3, his powers. Jack Russell's powers differ from your typical werewolf. While he does transform uncontrollably when a full moon is out, the character has gained the ability to transform at will, voluntarily outside of the moon cycle, in which he retains his human intellect and general control. This control has fluctuated over the years. In 2004, he was really struggling to control himself, locking himself up in cages and receiving glimpses of hell while he shapeshifted. In his werewolf form, Jack stands an impressive 7 feet tall and gains superhuman strength, speed, stamina, durability, agility, and reflexes. His superhuman sense of smell carries over into his human form when he is not transformed. And like all other werewolves, he is next to impossible to kill but is very susceptible to silver, which has inherent mystical purity. Up next, number 2, the MCU. Jack Russell's appearances have been a bit more spotty in recent times. He was largely inactive during the 80s, and in the late 90s, Volume 2 of his solo series performed poorly and was cancelled. And after the events of Civil War II, Jack Russell hasn't really been around a whole lot. To be fair, he wasn't around a whole lot prior to Civil War II either. He had become a member of the Legion of Monsters alongside the Man-Thing and Living Mummy, who teamed up with the Punisher to protect an underground city home to a bunch of innocent sentient monsters. There has been a bunch of cameos from Jack in other stories, including Civil War II, where Deadpool shot him with a blunderbuss after discovering Jack had an affair with his wife Shikla. But the character is far from entering into obscurity. Reports are he'll be getting the MCU treatment. Many have theorized that the cinematic adaptation that he will be tied to is the Moon Knight feature film, which is in the works. Moon Knight actually debuted in Werewolf by Night issue 32. Plus, Jack has a history with Blade and Dracula, the former having his own feature film slated to come out in the MCU as well. And finally, in at number 1, Tyr St. Clair. One of the many cameos Werewolf by Night has made after that little stint with the Punisher was in X Factor. After he was drawn to their base X Factor investigations when Wolfsbane gave birth to her child. The child, who would become known as Tyr St. Clair later on, was a cub that prior to birth was hunted down by many supernatural figures, and with the help of Russell, Wolfsbane and the child were able to escape capture and death. Tyr was fathered by an Asgardian wolf prince. When he was born, Wolfsbane rejected him, seeing that he was feral and vicious, attacking Agamemnon, and his existence went against her religious beliefs. After Tyr attacked them, Banshee used her sonic scream on the cub, sending him flying out of the house and into a nearby forest. Hela, who had been tracking the child, tried to claim Tyr but was stopped by other monsters and gods wanting to do the same. So the child hid in a cave. Jack would find the cub and decide to raise him as his own. The two would be pursued by Darwin all across the country until Wolfsbane, Shatterstar, and Richter were able to find them and aid them. Unfortunately, this has a sad ending. Tyr was eventually seemingly killed off in X Factor issue 256 in 2013, and hasn't made an appearance since.